Yeah, I would be coming in from.
Good evening, everyone. We're ready to start. I'd like to call the meeting of the Committee of the Whole for Monday, July 19th to order. And we start, as we always do, with our land acknowledgement. And I would ask Councillor Chris Potts to please do the land acknowledgement.
Thanks, Chair Jeffrey. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of our Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all the diverse stakeholders in the area. We seek to do better, and we continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you very much. And just to note before the adoption of the agenda that Councillors Baines and Doherty are unable to join us this evening. So first of all, the adoption of the agenda, that the content of the Committee of the Whole agenda for June 19, 2023 be adopted as amended. Updates provided in the staff report T 2023-12, audited financial statements, and Appendix A was inserted in staff report T 23-13, statement of reserves and reserve funds report year ending 2022. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Potts and the Deputy Mayor. Any other additions or points? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest this evening? Seeing none, in our usual process, if something comes up, bring it to my attention and we'll make sure you have the opportunity to declare. We have no pre-registered deputations this evening. So before we enter into the public meeting opening, I'd just like to welcome all of you. So pleased that you have taken the time to join us in our process. And I want to go over a few of the rules of engagement. So we'd ask you with a large crowd that you be as quiet as possible and only speak when recognized by the chair. We're going to ask, in the interest of having as many people speak as who wish to this evening, that we don't repeat. You can start your comment with, I agree with the previous speaker in addition to, I agree with the previous speaker except for, but that we not repeat what we've already heard. That way everyone will have an opportunity to share in the process. So thank you for that. And we're looking forward to your respectful and constructive comments. Council members work really hard. Our staff work very hard. They have professional designations, and we rely on their advice to make these decisions. Of course, this evening on the public meeting specific, there is the statutory public meeting. There will be no decision made. So we're just looking forward to hearing from people who wish to speak. And just for some clarity as to what is relevant to the discussion this evening and what is not, I thought I would review a list for everyone to have an idea of the topics that we are wishing to speak to tonight. So the topics related to the principle of development with respect to the public statutory hearing tonight is land use, residential, commercial, environmental protection, etc., density and related matters, so unit number and type, traffic and infrastructure impacts, etc. And then protection of natural heritage features and functions, compatibility with surrounding lands, zoning matters such as height, setbacks, lot coverage for buildings, lot area frontage, minimum landscaped area size, and number of parking spaces. So what it will not directly be part of this discussion tonight, in which I will have to call you short on if we'd go down that road. The discussion will not include massing, orientation, and conceptual designs, access for pedestrians and vehicles, provision and location of walkways, paths, driveways, parking areas, lighting, waste and recycling facilities, site design features such as fencing, landscaping, tree plantings, street furniture, paving materials, etc. And no detailed infrastructure design discussions such as stormwater management facilities, snow storage, waste pickup, and parkland dedication. Those are all for a later process with respect to the site plan control process. So if we're all clear on what's applicable to the conversation tonight, then I will go right into the public meeting at this point. Welcome to Collingwood's public planning meeting for a proposed official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for the property municipally addressed as 11476 Highway 26, located on the north side of Highway 26 and generally known as the Glow condo development. No decision will be made this evening. The purpose of this meeting is to introduce the proposed development and obtain public comments on the planning applications. The meeting will begin with presentations by staff and the applicant. Members of the public will then be invited to offer their comments or questions regarding the proposal. And once the public portion of the meeting has been completed, no more public comments or questions will be allowed at today's meeting. I will then ask council members if they have any questions. Once all public and councillor questions and comments have been received, staff and or the applicant will have an opportunity to respond or provide clarification if appropriate. And all questions and comments specific to the purpose of the subject applications will be addressed in a future staff report. So it is very important that the town receive the correct names, email addresses, and mailing addresses, including postal code of individuals having an interest in these planning applications. If you plan to speak to the committee at this meeting, or if you want to be notified of any future council or committee meetings concerning the application being considered, you must provide this information. So, under the Planning Act, only those who have verbally expressed any comments here tonight or provided a written submission of any comments prior to council's decision have the right to appeal any decision of council to the Ontario Land Tribunal. And if you do not make an oral submission this evening or a written submission to council before the council decision, you may not be added as a party to an appeal before the Ontario Land Tribunal unless, in the opinion of the tribunal, there are reasonable grounds to do so. So this meeting is being recorded and streamed on the municipal YouTube channel and broadcast on Rogers TV. Your name, address, comments, and any other personal information are being recorded according to the Municipal Act and the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act. The minutes will be available to the general public on the town's website. I will ask that planning services also confirm that notification to the public has been given as required by the Planning Act within their presentation this evening. Again, I would like to remind everyone that no decision will be made today and the applications will be considered by council on a future date. So with that, once we get past the town planner presentation and the applicant planner's presentation, the speakers will be limited to 5 minutes. So just so you have that. And we will time you and give you a 30-second heads up. All right. So I'm pleased to introduce our town planner, Julie Nolan, who will be giving the presentation on behalf of the town this evening. Welcome.
Thank you. And welcome, everyone. There's, just so you know, there's quite a few people in the hallway as well. Thank you all for coming. Today's public meeting is legislated under the Planning Act and is required as part of the public process. The purpose of the public meeting is to introduce the applications and to receive public comments to be considered in future decision making. Next slide, please. I'm providing an outline of the flow of the public meeting. I will present the proposed land use changes and Planning Act applications, and then the applicant will provide more details of their vision of the proposed development. Once both of us have provided our presentations, the public will be permitted to provide comments followed up by council questions. Next slide, please. So the town received 2 applications on behalf of IntegraCon, an application for official plan amendment and an application for zoning bylaw amendment. Notice of complete application and public meeting were circulated together to internal and external agencies and First Nations on May 18th and were also published in the Collingwood Connection newspaper on May 25th. Additionally, as a courtesy, notice was also mailed to property owners within 120 meters of the subject property, including condo corporations. Next slide, please. For everyone's knowledge, I have outlined the planning process above. Anything in dark blue has been completed already, including deeming the application complete, requesting preliminary comments on the application, as well as serving notice of public meeting. We are at the public meeting stage. Next steps include peer reviewing the technical reports, internal review of the planning applications and planning merits, and reviewing public comments and technical reports, providing comments back to the applicant for potential modifications. Though the process appears linear on the screen, there's typically many comments and responses that happen between the town and the applicant while refining the applications. There is a lot of technical review that takes place prior to getting to stage number 8 that you see up on the screen. Staff prepare a draft recommendation report once they have had a full review of these materials. We are still in the initial stages of the review and are awaiting peer review of the technical reports, just as a reminder. Next slide, please. The subject property of the proposed official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment applications is municipally addressed as 11476 Highway 26 and has an area of 2.81 hectares. The property is highlighted red on the screen and is currently surrounded by residential to the east, north, and west. And to the south is institutional, which is Pretty River Academy, as well as proposed residential. Next slide, please. The official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendments being sought are to grant land use planning permissions to build high-density residential in an apartment-style building on the subject lands. The applicant has provided preliminary conceptual site plan designs. However, the layout and design of the site you see up on the slide right now will be further explored during site plan control. That process will happen at a later date. We have not received a site plan control application as it's premature to do so. Next slide, please. The first application received by the town is an official plan amendment for the entire property. The subject lands are currently designated medium density residential in the official plan, which would permit approximately 20 as a minimum to 55 as a maximum units per hectare. And the applicant is seeking to redesignate the lands to environmental protection, identified in green on the slide, and high density residential, identified as yellow on the slide above. The high density designation currently permits a range of a minimum 55 to a maximum of 120 units per hectare, and the applicant is seeking 223 units per hectare. According to the town's official plan, density is calculated based on the lands within the residential designation and not the gross area of the property. Therefore, the density is calculated only on 0.871 hectares of the subject property. That's the part that's identified in yellow on the slide above, and it's not calculated on the entire parcel. Next slide, please. The second application received by the town is a rezoning on the subject property. The property is currently zoned resort commercial. Oh, I think, yep, there we go. And that's in red on the screen there. And the applicant is proposing to rezone the property to environmental protection, identified in green on the slide above, and residential fourth density with a special exception identified in orange on the screen. Next slide, please. The proposed zoning would protect the coastal wetland from future development and would also permit an apartment-style building on the subject lands with 2 exceptions. So the parcel above, anything you see in orange, would be rezoned to residential fourth density with a special exception permitting a maximum building height of 23.35 meters. And that's about 6 stories. And the second exception for a reduction in the required parking spaces to be allowed, which would be 234 parking spaces as a minimum. Next slide, please. I've prepared a comparison chart of the 4th residential zoning above. The R4 special exception zone, you can see the differential on the far right. So everything else in the zone would be applicable, and the 2 exceptions they're seeking are for height to increase by 5.35 meters and to reduce the parking minimum by 9 parking spaces. Can you please mute your phone?
Sorry.
Sorry, can we pause for a minute?
Yeah, sure. We'll just pause for a second. The question, Deputy Clerk, is whether there's speakers possible in the other area. I'm not sure. I believe we have no way of facilitating that, but go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. We do not have speakers available at this time for the hallway.
Okay.
Yeah, we can open the one door. It might help get the volume going through.
Yeah. The capacity for the room is 65. So if someone wanted to sit on the floor, I suppose you could. It's also televised. So you have the opportunity to watch it from the comfort of a chair and a TV. Okay, we're going to proceed. Go ahead, Julie.
Just give me a minute to find my space.
Yep, no problem.
And,
I don't want
some people I think are coming in as well, so just give me a minute here.
Yeah. I'm not sure it's going to be appropriate to have people standing behind our senior staff. Sorry, I'm going to have to ask you to restrict yourself to just the door across between the fire extinguisher across the door there, please. Our senior staff need to be able to work and comment and, yeah, just a little bit more. Thank you for that. All right, and we'll try to speak up as best we can, but
Is there a loudspeaker?
no, there is not. All right, so we're going to ask for everybody, please, for your quiet and your utmost attention as we let our planner continue with the presentation. Go ahead.
Thank you. Next slide, please. We have circulated the proposal to internal departments as well as external agencies and First Nations. We are still awaiting comments from many of them. With respect to public comments, there have been several comments received since Friday, June 16th. And if you have submitted comments in writing, you do not need to reiterate those today. We have received them. We have your name and information on file. If you do want to reiterate them, perhaps somebody that has not provided comments can do that. But be assured we do have those comments received. So I'd like to also remind that for those of you that are new here, are just arriving, no decisions going to be made today, and we're going to review those comments, review the technical reports, and work with the applicant to move forward in the application. Next slide, please. So, in next steps, the town staff are still awaiting peer review of the submitted technical reports. Once the results of the peer-reviewed reports and public comments and agency comments have all been received, town staff will complete a review of the applications and work with the applicant on any modifications to the applications, followed by a recommendation report to council. The official plan designation and zoning have to be established prior to receiving a site plan control application. Next slide, please. If anyone was unable to make today's meeting or is unable to get verbal comments in during the allotted time, please email myself at jnolan@collingwood.ca. That's jnolan@collingwood.ca. Or you can also provide written comments by mail to Town Hall. We accept verbal comments only during a public meeting or council meeting. So verbal comments are only permitted during a public meeting or a council meeting. That does not mean you cannot still provide written comments. So please do so. Next slide, please. To be notified of future agendas or meetings related to these applications, you can view them on our website or also subscribe to receive them automatically through your email. And if you would like to receive notice of future meetings or a decision, please provide your contact details today. For those of you in the hallway, you can write your contact details on the sheet in here that's on the table. You might want to wait till the very end to come in and do that so we don't disrupt the flow. But please make sure we get your contact details to be notified of future decisions and meetings. And please also email me if you would like to be circulated. And you can go to the next slide. There's more information on how to be notified. Again, please write down my email, jnolan@collingwood.ca, if you would like to provide any written comments. That's all from me, and thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And sorry about the interruption, but we appreciate that you could carry that through okay. All right. So now we will ask, please, that Christine Loft come forward, present on behalf of the applicant, please.
Thank you. Good evening. Good evening to Chair, Your Worship, Council, and those in the audience. That better?
Bend it down at the mic.
So good evening. My name is Christine Loft of Loft Planning, Inc., and I am the planner working on behalf of the landowner, VMK Capital, Inc.
Christine, I'm sorry. Could everyone in the crowd please check your phones and make sure they're on silent? Let's just take 30 seconds. I want you to make sure everybody take a look at your phone and make sure it's on silent, because it's very frustrating trying to present something this important and be interrupted. All right. I'm assuming I'm not going to hear another one go. Thank you. Okay. Sorry, Christine. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening. So with me tonight is Desmond De Silva, who is the owner and the developer of the project. With me is Jill Brennan, who is Director of New Development with Integricon, Kevin Sampson, who's an engineer with Tatham Engineering, and virtually we have Constance Agnew with LGL Environmental, as well as David Arsenault of Arsenault Architect. And at the conclusion of my presentation, Mr. De Silva would like to address council with just a few words, if that's okay, through the chair. Mm-hmm. Next slide, please. And actually, next slide. So the lands have a lot area of 2.8 hectares and 160 meters onto Highway 26. The site is vacant, and it was the former site of the Beacon Glow Hotel. Through the completion of an environmental impact study and extensive consultation with the NBCA over the past 3 years, a wetland feature has now been staked. We would note that the previous owner had submitted development applications in 2016, which included development of the entire site with no wetland identified and there at that time was no requirement for an environmental impact study. Through IntegraCon's formal pre-consultation in 2020 and into early 2021, the NVCA then identified the presence of an unevaluated wetland. And based on those comments, an environmental impact study was then required, and extensive consultation between LGL Environmental and the NVCA began. We did experience some delay with regard to the pandemic and the NVCA not completing site visits. So we did get a little delayed on the actual staking of that happening later on in the pandemic when we were beginning to meet in person. So as such, the developable area of the site has significantly changed over the past 3 years as a result of that. We have had multiple meetings with the NVCA staff, pre-consultation submissions to the town, and ultimately the full submission that is now before you. So on this slide, the dark gray area is the staked wetland boundary, and the lighter gray area, which really surrounds that dark gray area, that is the 30-meter adjacent lands. And then the development envelope, which you can see the conceptual plan in the southeast corner. So the wetland and adjacent lands consist of approximately 70% of the total land area of the site. Next slide. The proposal is for a multi-unit residential development. There are 194 units proposed between 2 6-story buildings. There is an upper mechanical and amenity floor as well, which I'll show you in a moment. With regard to the unit breakdown, there are 13 one-bedroom units, 113 one-bedroom plus den, 48 two-bedroom units, and 22 bedroom units plus den. There is a one-story central corridor that is the main entrance to the buildings and includes various amenity spaces, as well as concierge and administration offices. Parking is provided at surface and underground, and access is from a single access point onto Highway 26. The underground parking access is located just to the left of the entrance onto the site, and you can sort of see that in the rectangular gray portion adjacent to the front lot line. Next slide. Just some high-level project statistics. So the site overall has a lot area of 2.8 hectares. The staked wetland is 1.94 hectares, which includes the adjacent lands, and a developable area of just over 0.8 hectares. With regard to the unit numbers, Building A includes 100 units and Building B includes 94 units. With respect to height, the mechanical and amenity floor has a height of 23.35 meters. And you'll see in a moment, but that mechanical and amenity space is not the entire roof portion. It's about 400 square meters of area, and I will show you that in a moment. And the 6-story residential floors have a total height of 19.35 meters. So we do make that distinction between the full 6 stories of residential units and then an upper floor. The overall lot coverage of the site is 39.97%, which is taking into account only the developable lands, and the setback, as Ms. Nolan has identified, have been met for the site. Next slide. A landscape plan was required for a complete submission. I won't go into detail, but I would just point out that the rear of the building does include an small outdoor dining area and pavilion seating area. And at the front of the building is a curved seating area, a fountain connecting sidewalks along the front of the building, as well as an entrance canopy at the front door. The plan does include landscape buffers along the lot lines and adjacent to the buildings, as well as a rain garden, which functions as a bioswale, and that is located just within the 30-meter adjacent lands. Next slide. With regard to site operations, again, these are maybe site plan details, but in reviewing the comments from the public, as well as meetings we've had with Lighthouse Point representatives, some of these items are the key issues that I think they're interested in. So just at a really high level, the trash and recycling storage is all internal to the building. The bins would just be pushed out on garbage day, so there is no outdoor refuse proposed. The building does does contain storage lockers, and each unit in the building would have a dedicated storage locker. There is a central corridor, which includes obviously the entrance to the building, as well as amenity spaces, washrooms, administration offices, and access to the outdoor seating area. Due to the limited space location of the wetland and the parking, snow storage is going to be limited, and so snow storage is proposed to be pushed to the edges of the existing parking, and on large snow events, the snow would have to be removed from the site. The access to the underground parking, again, is just located to the left of the entrance, and you can see that in the rectangular hatched area. In terms of building security, there are no gates or anything at the front access, but all of the access points to the building, as well as the underground parking, would require access utilizing a fob or buzzing up to the residential unit in order to obtain access into the building. There is no fencing proposed at this time. There is existing fencing on the lighthouse lands on the west, north, and east lot lines. Next slide. So just a little bit of history on the wetland, because it's really been 3 years of dealing with the wetland for the consulting team. So following LGL's field work and study, the wetland was staked by LGL in conjunction with the NVCA on site on June 28th, 2022. The wetland feature has an area of 1.8 hectares, plus the adjacent lands, which gets us to the 1.94. It is comprised of 2 different wetland types, including swamp, both deciduous and coniferous, and marsh habitat. LGL has provided an ecological offsetting and enhancement plan in a preliminary form that would include the restoration of the wetland buffer. And this restoration also includes the removal of the existing foundation and concrete patches, which are within the 30-meter adjacent lands. And you can see that on the aerial. It's the white linear area within that 30 meters. So just old foundation parts of the hotel that are still in existence today. The OPA and the ZBA will be utilized to protect the wetland feature from development. In terms of the mapping on this slide, the pink area was the original unevaluated wetland that the NVC raised during consultation. And so it's considered an other wetland and was unevaluated. The town's documents did not specifically identify a wetland at the time of pre-consultation. The orange line on the slide is now the established wetland boundary based on the LGL and the NVCA staking on site. And the dash line is the 30-meter adjacent lands. And so all development is located outside of the 30-meter adjacent lands. There are 2 pinch points where, and it's not the ground level or the building, but there are some overhangs of the balconies that are slightly located within the 30-meter, and they are clear, maybe not so clear on there, but are clear if you're able to look at the site plan available online. Next slide. So just with respect to density, in consultation with staff, it is understood that by definition, the lands are to be designated for residential purposes, that the area of lands that are designated for residential purposes constitutes the gross hectare basis of the density calculation. So we did want to provide council the gross density calculation utilizing the overall lot area as well as the net density, which will be utilized for the implementing approval documents. So the gross density utilizing the 2.8 hectare lot size provides for a density of 70 units per hectare. And the net density, or the area only within the residential, proposed to be within the residential designation, which is a total of 0.871 hectares, would provide for the 223 units per hectare. The high-density residential policies identify a set range for apartment buildings between 55 and 120. And so we think it's important to point out that the 70 units utilizing the entire area of the property would actually be in the mid-range of that high density. In early versions of IntegraCon's plans and prior to knowing of and understanding the extent of the wetland, the unit count was generally the same, but was spread out over the entirety of the property. And while the calculated density does does exceed the high density maximum, we are of the opinion that the function of the wetland plays an integral role. The project would protect 1.94 hectares of land, which is approximately 70% of the site, and will in turn focus the same number of units over the 0.8 hectare developable area. Next slide. The parking is one of our exception requests. So the plan on the slide is the underground parking layout. The total number of parking spaces required includes, including visitor parking, is 243 parking spaces. The proposal includes 234 parking spaces, so we are requesting a reduction of 9 spaces. And this reduction ask is from the visitor parking. So each unit will remain to have a dedicated parking space as required by the bylaw. And I just point out that the bylaw requirements are separated between unit parking and visitor parking. So the visitor parking is primarily at grade with 32 spaces, and the remainder is underground with 8 spaces. In total, there are 32 parking spaces at grade or at the front door of the building, and a proposed 202 within the underground. There are also 20 secure bike spaces provided in the underground as well. Thank you. So I won't reiterate that, but just to tell you that the parking garage is generally consists of the entirety of the development envelope. And so once the entrance comes up on the plan, I think you'll have your bearings of where the entrance is and the access to the underground you can see there. So there are, if you're available or if you're able to look at the plan online, you can certainly see each of the dedicated parking spaces, bike lockers, storage lockers, etc. Next slide. In terms of amenity spaces, the plan on this slide is the top floor of Building A, although Building A and Building B are generally the same. The presence of the wetland has limited the outdoor parkland and the outdoor amenity area, and as such, a number of amenity spaces are provided within the building and the immediate outdoor spaces. These include the central corridor, which will have a gym, a pet lounge, family lounge, as well as the outdoor dining area and golf simulator. The overall outdoor amenity area on the north side is 504 square meters, and additional amenity space within the building, as well as the upper floor, which is shown on the plan here, will have a total area of 1,912 square meters of amenity space for the residents. Each unit also includes a balcony or terrace for private space. The proposed parkland is cash in lieu. Next slide. In discussion with IntegraCon, they do have an interest in providing for 9 affordable units that would be made available by way of ownership. This would be equivalent to 5% of the total number of units, and we are open for further discussion with staff on unit sizes that would be made available to potential purchasers, and we're open to further discussions with staff on how those potential purchasers would be vetted and referred to the IntegraCon sales team. Next slide. So we did have a rendering prepared. It gives a very good, I think, general feel for what the development would look like. It is a rendering, but generally depicts the architectural drawings that have been submitted with the complete submission. The design does include a mix of building materials. You can see the balconies, which include aluminum railings and tempered glass panels. The upper floor terraces are visible as well, and the upper floor outdoor amenity area. The 6th floor is stepped back, which you can see on the rendering, and terraces are provided to the end units. And then the upper floor, which is mechanical in part, as well as indoor and outdoor amenity space, which would be available to residents. There's also the 1-story central corridor that can be seen, a covered entryway, and lastly, one access onto the site with a circular drive. And I believe that's the last slide. So those are my comments. And if through the chair, Mr. De Silva could address
Yes.
council.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Mr. De Silva?
Thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce myself and my company. I'm 62 years old, came to this country at the age of 12, so this is my 50th wedding anniversary, 50th anniversary, and went through the engineering MBA, did all the studying, and here I am. My family, I've come to this Collingwood, visited, enjoyed it for all these years. So when the opportunity became available for this site, I jumped on it. I thought the gateway to Collingwood, what a great opportunity, been around for 50 years to enjoy. Why not do something great here? Very excited about this project, and that in Integricon, we embrace ESG, and for those who are aware of ESG, E is environment. And when the Conservation Authority looked at taking a substantial percentage of the property, we responded in a positive way, recognizing that we embraced the environment and we dedicated that land. The second component is as for social. So when staff had, and we recognize this town is concerned about housing and affordable housing, we embraced affordable housing under the S component and recognize the caring that's required around that strategic goal. And the third is governance, and that's very, very important, that governance allows sustainability, and we requested the number of units to support this project to make it viable and approach it in a holistic way, so we can support the environmental, we can do the affordable housing, and yet have sufficient units to be able to make this thing, to make the numbers work. So I'm very excited about this project, and I think it's a great project that's the gateway, and excited that it's a holistic approach and also a collaborative approach. So I thank the council for your leadership and for the staff that of the town that have spent considerable amount of time working on this project and collaborating. And I'd like to also take this opportunity to thank my own team that have been very dedicated and loyal. I think this is a great example of the different stakeholders of public and private, and a good example. COVID happened, and then the world discovered this great place. Fortunately, for 50 years, my family knew about this great place and thought this is the opportunity to do something great. So thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Mr. De Silva and Ms. Loft. So now will come the part for the public participation. And if I could please have a show of hands of how many people would like to speak. All right. So we're just going to start. There was one gentleman who brought a slide show. We're going to start with you. We don't normally do that. The deputy clerk has authorized it. You have 5 minutes. So that's for slides and comments, and we'll give you a 30-second warning. So if we'll just wait for staff to get your slide deck up.
Chair, committee members, and town staff. My name is Colin Inglis. I am an owner and full-time resident of Lighthouse Point. Nice to see you all again as we once more discuss development in the northwest portion of Collingwood, more specifically the Highway 26 West corridor between Cranberry Trails East and West. As chair of the Lighthouse Point Shared Facilities Committee, I am acting as an official spokesperson for the community. Our property manager and a planner acting for us will also speak. Could I have the next slide, please? To begin, I hope you are aware that an online petition has been started asking that the density proposed in this application not be permitted by the town. In less than a week, more than 1,000 signatures have been collected. I would also urge that you take note of the many thoughtful comments attached to the survey. The application process for official plan and zoning bylaw amendments is weighted in the favor of the development industry. In order for this application to be deemed complete, there must have been interaction for some time between the developer's representatives and town staff. As members of the public, we are given short notice and this limited opportunity to comment on a complex, evolving subject. This seems unbalanced. Next, please. We are left to wonder why it is that developers' representatives are exempt from the town lobbyist registry. As the saying goes, if it walks like a duck. I will shortly go through some of the applicants' submissions to point out how they favor a specific point of view. There are two over-the-top features of this application: density and the building height required to achieve that density in a small footprint. I say over-the-top because according to the official plan, this property is designated medium-density residential. Next, please. Even if we take the entire property at 2.8 hectares and multiply by a maximum medium density of 55 units per hectare, we come to 154 units. Yet here we have an application for 194 units. The planning justification says the proposed building envelope and building footprint respect an average adjacent lands. Is my math wrong? Next, please. The planning justification, as shown in yellow on the slide, recognizes that the official plan calls for medium density and then goes on to offer some gobbledygook in red in an attempt to justify higher density.
Excuse me, Mr. Inglis, just going to interrupt. If you could keep your comments constructive and factual. I'm not sure we recognize gobbledygook in here. So if you could just respect that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, that's my opinion. Maximum height for medium density is set at 15 meters. One would think that an application containing a height exceedance would have what is being asked for clearly illustrated. Yet it is necessary to dig deep into the noise assessment on the publicly available documents to find an elevation drawing which shows the height being proposed, which, by the way, is more than 23.5 meters above grade, as the total height is not shown. If you are wondering about this sort of height and mass, next please. Look up the street at the corner of Hume. Picture this out on Highway 26. The planning justification says, finally, the proposed building is proposed at 6 stories, which is higher than Lighthouse Point development, but similar to proposed development on the south side of Highway 26 within Skydev, brackets 4-story, and Rupert's Landing, brackets 10-story. Implying that Rupert's Landing is 10 stories in its entirety is disingenuous at best. Next, please. You can see the red speck of high density labeled Bayview Tower in the context of the larger area on the screen. A critical reading of the planning justification is both warranted and necessary. On to some more concerns. Traffic study volumes were measured in March and extrapolated to produce summer volumes. We think, or I should say know, that the extrapolation factor is far too low. The study does not take into account that Lighthouse Point presently controls access during the warm months, which could back traffic onto Highway 26. With respect to active transportation, the study admits that there are no trails along the adjacent portion of Highway 26, but goes on to say that the shoulders are wide, so everything will be fine. Next slide, please. I watched a recent presentation in this chamber where the design standards for active transportation were discussed. Roads with the speed limit and volume of Highway 26 require separated pathways, not wide shoulders for active transportation. In summer, Highway 26 volumes can be off this chart. The stormwater management study suggests that there is no drainage taking place at the northeast corner of the property. Next, please. These pictures tell a different story. You can see the culvert partially immersed in the top photo and the discharge under the fence in the lower. The additional drainage requirements for this proposal is to be routed at the northwest corner through a culvert on Lighthouse Point property. It is understanding that there is no drainage easement through the culvert in favor of the property in question. Further, it is also our understanding that Lighthouse Point is responsible for the maintenance and repair of this culvert. How will the inherent unfairness of this be addressed? 2 additional questions come to mind. Is a rain garden a permitted use in an environmental buffer zone? How effective will the mitigations measures be in protecting the environmental area during construction, as considerable activity will necessarily take place in the buffer zone? Noise. The bulk of the submitted study is focused on the impact of surrounding sources on the proposed development. Next, please. Here we see the one paragraph of a 42-page study devoted to the noise caused by the proposal. It does inadvertently identify a deficiency in the town noise bylaw in that objective, quantifiable standards are not included. If, for example, a maximum sound level of 55 decibels was mandated at the property line, not only could conformity of a new build be easily determined, but maintenance of equipment and sound attenuation systems could also be mandated. Parks. I would be remiss if I did not point out the dearth of public parkland in the area. Next, please.
Mr. Inglis, just to let you know, you're at just about at 6 minutes. Because you're representing a large group, I'm going to give you another minute.
The area in which this and several other recent proposals are located is outlined in yellow with the one and only park identified with a blue arrow. Next, please. The sad state of this park is documented in the park master plan. As member of the council, what can you do for us, the residents of Collingwood? Reject this proposal as currently presented, even if it means an OLT hearing. We will be right there with you. If the proposal is significantly modified, call another public meeting. Ensure that those being paid by developers are treated as lobbyists. This will bind them to a code of conduct, provide protection for town staff, allowing them to be critical and give the public some transparency into the process. I'm sure I don't need to remind you what past transparency failures have cost the town, both reputationally and monetarily. Enhance the town noise control bylaw to include quantifiable standards. Develop a concrete costed and budgeted plan for parkland in the area under discussion. Develop a concrete costed and budgeted plan for a 4-season active transportation path along the Highway 26 West corridor from Harbor Street to at least Silver Creek Drive. Direct staff to propose solutions for managing burdens put on a private property owners by new development. Thank you for your attention and consideration.
Thank you. Okay. Could I have a show of hand? I think I'm going to apologize because the podium's kind of covering some people, but I think I saw the woman in a pink sweater with her hand up. If you'd like to come forward, please. Well, I'm running the meeting, so I'll speak when I'll ask you to speak to. So, thank you, Andrew. You can be next.
Thank you. My name's Mariana Steiner-Todd. I'm a resident of Lighthouse Point. I live at Cedar Point Court in Condo Corp 261. I'm actually a member of the board for that Condo Corp. I'm treasurer. And I just want to, I don't have a formal statement or a presentation, but I just want to speak to you as a person who lives there. And our properties are the group of condos that are to the west, the cluster that is closest to Highway 26 and adjacent to this proposed property. They are on the east side. Two key concerns beyond the comments made by Colin, which were well representing all our concerns. The first is with regards to stormwater management. I'm not an engineer or an expert, but I did pictures are worth 1,000 words, and I did look through the stormwater management presentation or report. In the final pages, there is an image that shows that the water flow will be directed towards the west of the property, and there is a drainage easement along that border. At present, these properties, so it's Condo Corp 261, and I believe the other one is 102, which is adjacent to us, we already are dealing with stormwater issues. That area gets flooded through the spring whenever there's a great rainstorm, and we carry the burden of costs for some pump systems for our units. All this water flow that's being proposed to come in that direction towards one culvert is going to just create additional burdens on our condo corps to manage the overflow of that water. And the second thing I'd like to sort of flag with regards to noise, when I look at a proposal of this size, we're talking of 194 units with no amenities whatsoever, except a tiny little patio garden area and a rooftop patio. And my sense of how that will evolve is that we will have crowds of people hovering above us, partying on their rooftop patios to enjoy the sunset. And that's not what we're about here. That we enjoy our property. We have, as a group, we respect one another's privacy and have great concern for keeping things quiet and respectful to one another. And to look at this proposal and see that the only amenities that are going to be provided are a rooftop garden hovering above beyond the 6 stories is totally unacceptable to me, to have that type of proposal that incompatible to the neighboring properties. So that was really, one third comment regard to parking. So I see the drawings relative to the 234 parking spots, but there's no indication at all with regards to venting, and no indication about air quality reviews or studies as to what's going to be created by having 234 cars parked underground. That exhaust needs to be vented somewhere, and yet there's nothing yet proposed as to what impact will that have on us. So I know there's more to come, but on my initial review of what I could get through on the thousands of pages of documents, with my limited understanding, these were things that really got flagged to me in that review. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. Great. Thank you for your comments. All right. So by popular demand, Andrew, if you could come forward, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Andrew Pescuzzo. I'm a registered professional planner here this evening on behalf of the Shared Facilities Committee of Lighthouse Point. I've been retained by Lighthouse to review and comment on, obviously, the applications before you. I was also previously retained to review and comment in 2015 as well as in 2016 on previous iterations of the development concept. Obviously, those were by a different owner. I understand that the letter I recently submitted to my client after reviewing the submission materials was submitted to the clerk in advance of the meeting. I was asked by Lighthouse to provide some of the highlights of my letter. The residents of Lighthouse surround the Glow condominium property on 3 sides. I think that's important to take into consideration. As a result, the potential impacts associated with the proposed OPA and zoning bylaw amendment will have the most direct impact on Lighthouse residences. I understand, obviously, that some of the residents are here tonight and some are participating virtually and will be speaking to their concerns. My main concern on behalf of Lighthouse is the density being proposed at over 200 units per hectare. Please keep in mind that I am a private planning consultant for other property owners in southern Georgian Bay. And I believe that increased densities in certain locations is good planning. However, it is my respectful submission that the proposed density in this specific scenario is premature in advance of the ongoing official plan update that the town is currently involved in, as well as incompatible with what appears to be an established density of well below 100 units per hectare within this specific area of Collingwood. With regard to height, it is my opinion that the previous iterations of 4 stories were more compatible with the existing and proposed developments in the area, as well as more consistent with the existing medium density designation that the property is currently designated. I understand that parking is proposed to be reduced by 9 spaces from 243 down to 234. This is based on 1 parking space per condo, as has been indicated, as well as 0.20 spaces per condo for visitors. So basically 1 visitor space for every 5 units. It doesn't appear that there is any overflow parking on the rest of the property because of the wetland and the associated buffer. Lighthouse has asked me to make it clear that overflow parking will not be permitted within Lighthouse, And obviously that's been made clear to the applicant as well too. Currently, the 5% parkland component required under the Planning Act is proposed as cash in lieu. I also understand that all of the proposed indoor and outdoor amenity spaces on site will be private only. And this is, in my opinion, consistent with the majority of the other developments in the immediate area. However, none of the other existing or proposed developments in the area have a density that exceeds the 200 unit per hectare cap. Some of the other potential issues I raised with my client were privacy concerns related to the balconies overlooking some of the lighthouse units, backyards on the west side of the property, and potential emergency service concerns with only one access point to the development. Finally, I wanted to thank the applicant, that may sound unusual, and his development team for communicating with Lighthouse, specifically me, in advance of tonight's public meeting and providing direct feedback. They were even willing, as has been indicated by the applicant's agent, to meet virtually and discuss the development proposal and provide additional follow-up clarification, which has been very helpful. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Pescuso. All right. So I saw another couple more hands over here. Could you raise your hands again? Yep. Okay. Gentlemen, yep.
Sorry. Thank you to the chair for allowing me to speak to you this evening. Good evening, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor Fryer, and members of council and staff. My name is Cameron Mitchell. I reside at 91 Garbett Crescent here in beautiful Collingwood, Ontario. It's nice to see you all again. I believe the last time we crossed paths was this past fall when Lighthouse Point hosted an all-candidates meeting in its community center. I come before you tonight in two capacities. First, personally, as a very concerned member of the larger Collingwood community, and second, professionally as the property manager for the Lighthouse Point Shared Facilities Committee. In the interest of time and efficiency, as 576 unit owners cannot appear before council tonight, I've compiled the thoughts of many of the Lighthouse Point owners, which I will share with you now. The application you have before you tonight is neither reasonable or responsible. It is in fact egregious and extreme. Let's take a look at some of the numbers. At 194 units or 223 units per hectare, the developer is proposing a density level that is more than 300% greater than what this environmentally sensitive area is permitted to be zoned for. If we consider the neighboring developments in the West End, it is 197% higher than the highest current residential density in the area. To illustrate my point, let's review the density figures of those neighboring developments. Waterstone, 48 units per hectare. Rupert's Landing, 34 units. Dockside, 29. Wildwood Cove, 40. Lighthouse Point, 26. Green Tree, 25. Georgian Bay Hotel, 75 units. And the residences of Silver Creek, directly across the street from said property, 54 units per hectare. The Glow, 223 units per hectare. In no one's world, even with the push for higher densities, is 223 units per hectare anywhere near compatible with the neighboring developments. Their issues cannot override community health and safety. But beyond the numbers, grossly excessive density has adverse consequences to the environment, to traffic, and to the greater community. And speaking of traffic and their plans for the entrance exit to their development, what is going to happen on Highway 26 when hundreds of additional vehicles are trying to turn in and out of that property? It will be traffic congestion and chaos. I know one thing that will not happen, and I need to be very clear with council and staff tonight. The entrance to Lighthouse Point will never be used as an access point to this community. Their plan is neither reasonable or responsible. Speaking of traffic and Highway 26, I'd like to discuss the parking plans for this development. At less than one parking spot per unit, this application does not even meet the minimum standards for the town. If this application was for a location in downtown Collingwood where there was street parking or parking lots, you can make the argument in favor of it. But when this application is an area where there is no street parking or extra parking lots, it must be argued against. Where are all these cars going to park? Again, I can tell you it won't be at Lighthouse Point. It will have to be on the shoulder of Highway 26, or maybe even in the fire routes on site. I request that the Collingwood Fire Department, local detachment of the OPP, and the EMS services comment on the safety and feasibility of parking on the shoulder of Highway 26. Not only for the safety of drivers approaching vehicles, but for the safety of the brave men and women who provide our emergency response services. Their issues cannot override community health and safety. At the aforementioned all candidates meeting last fall, you were asked questions with regards to the town's practice of accepting cash in lieu of parkland. If I recall correctly, each of you expressed a desire to abandon this approach as it does not really provide any benefit to the town. If anything, Collingwood needs more parks, more trees, not less. Yet here we go again with a developer requesting the town forego its need for parkland and just accept cash instead. Are we going to allow this to happen yet again? I recall during the election campaign, one of you stating in the press that your top priority is to ensure development respects our community. Please fulfill your election promise. Their plan is neither reasonable or responsible. In closing, you'll be hearing from several more people tonight with their views on this application. Please know that the residents of Lighthouse Point are realistic, and we understand that this property will be developed. However, like all Collingwood residents, we expect the property to be developed in a manner that is reasonable and responsible, in a manner that respects the town's official plan and its residents. The current application does none of this. Their issues cannot override community health and safety. I urge you to dismiss this application outright. Send it back to the developer. Tell them to go back to the drawing board. Tell them to come back to the community with something that is reasonable and responsible. Do not waste another moment of your time, staff's time, or taxpayer resources on such an extreme application. Please remember, if we approve this application, this density, the next one is only going to be worse. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. Order, please. Order. Don't make me hammer the gavel. Okay, so going forward, we don't do the applauding and the whole thing here in the chambers. We want to hear from everybody. I know. It just takes some time away from the next person who wishes to speak. So can I see the next hands, please? The gentleman in the green shirt here, please come forward.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Andy Velikas. I'm a resident of Lighthouse Point. I'm also a professional engineer with over 30 years of experience working with municipalities on their major capital works projects, mainly in water and sewage. But so I've reviewed the application. On a cursory manner, I didn't get into engineering deep, but I have a couple of comments and concerns, a lot of little ones. The one is on the parking. I'd like to submit that one parking spot per unit is an applicable development standard for an urbanized area. And what I mean by an urbanized area is something where you have street parking, you have public parking lots where homeowners, unit owners have more than 2 cars or a 2-car family, or bring home a work vehicle from their employer. They have a place to park out on the street, out in a parking lot where they pay for parking. This does not exist in this area of Collingwood. There is no street parking anywhere. There's no public parking lots anywhere to be found. So I respectfully submit to council and to town staff that the one spot per person or per unit should not be applicable in this situation. I've just my son just bought a place in a Minto development in Toronto, and same sort of thing, one car per unit, and the street, but they had street parking. It's down on Lakeshore by Brown's Line there. The rush to get the few street parking spots is incredible. When I go down to visit them, it's like a crapshoot whether I'm going to be able to get a spot there. You have to show up well before 4 o'clock before everyone comes back from work. Anyway, so that's my one point, that we shouldn't be approving this. We should be looking at a much, at least a minimum of about 1.25 cars per unit per minute on top of the visitor parking. The other thing I had concerns with is, and it's great that the developer is proposing to designate wetlands, but there's also going to be extensive dewatering requirements during construction, and hydrogeological report indicated that there will have to be continual dewatering to keep the water from entering this underground garage. How is that going to impact the wetlands and the like in terms of long term? And then there's a number of drainage issues, but I won't.
We have heard.
Yeah, there's a few other things but yeah. Okay. So that's basically my comments, and I reserve to provide more comments later on in the process.
Sure.
Okay.
Appreciate
Great.
that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. No, thank you for being here. All right. Is there any more hands in the gallery portion here? If not, I'd like to give opportunity if there was anyone in the outer hall space who wished to speak. No? Okay. So we will now go to the online participants, and Deputy Clerk Dahl will check in with them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have one person with their hand up online so far. If you're wishing to speak to this planning application, please press the raise your hand feature, and we will let the first person in. If you can please state your name and address as we provide you opportunity to speak.
Right.
Hi there. Good evening. Thank you for
Hello.
convening. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Could you please state your name and address, please?
Thanks very much. My name is Louis Sarabia. I'm at 532 Mariners Way in Lighthouse Point. And I won't go over the ground that my friends have gone over, but my friend, the developer, was speaking about ESG, yet in his proposal, there is no parkland. Instead, it's cash in lieu of parkland, which doesn't seem to be very ESG to me. He also spoke of governance, yet the development that he seeks to make doesn't abide by the governance that Collingwood has set. It doesn't abide by the density requirements. It doesn't abide by the height limitations. It doesn't abide by the parking limitations. On parking, by the way, the visitors' parking is also going to be a storage area for snow. What happens at Christmas and New Year's when there's a snowfall? There's not going to be as much visitor parking there because it's going to be occupied by snow storage. And then we're back to parking on Highway 26 or trying to park at Lighthouse Point. So I really just have a problem with the why they're coming forward with this proposal, which really doesn't abide by many of the central regulations that are put forward by the city as part of the general plan. We can't let this go forward. It's just ignoring the key rules that we have set up for the development and the monitoring of organizations in Collingwood. Thank you for your time this evening.
Sardavia, did I get that close?
Sarabia.
Sarabia, thank you. All right. Anyone else online?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have another person with their hand up, John Dermont. If you could please make sure I said your name correctly and state your address when we allow you to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, John Dermott. I'm a resident of Lighthouse Point, also 879 Suncrest Circle. 2 points I'd like to make, just to pile on to Lewis's point about the parking. The average Canadian household has 1.5 cars. And I guess the developer is contemplating that every single person that moves into this development will only have one car. But in reality, we all know that a whole bunch of the residents are going to have 2 cars. They got to park somewhere. Between that and the visitors parking, it's not going to work. That's the first point. The second point is the environmental area is inevitably going to become a byway to the waterfront. Most people that buy in Collingwood want access to Georgian Bay. That area is going to become further compromised than just the development itself will provide for, just because of the foot traffic that is going to be going through there. What assurances is the developer going to provide that that area cannot be accessed in any way? I guess those are the 2 points that I wanted to make.
Very much. Anyone else online there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll call, oh, yes, we have one more person, Rob Henderson.
Thank you. Mr. Henderson?
Yes, Rob Henderson, 451 Mariners Way. I live at Lighthouse Point, and I just want to talk about the safety of on the Highway 26 there. I'm a bicyclist. I bike up and down Highway 26 and around Lighthouse Point and into town on some of the trails. On the east side of town, going toward Blue Shores and Lakeside development, there's some very nice wide sidewalk. Coming out on our side of town on the west end, we don't have that. We have what may be construed as a bike lane, but if anybody's ever ridden that before, it's pretty hazardous. You have to be very careful, kind of pick your days and the time of day that you travel. And I just think that we're not going to be helping these folks at the GLOW development by thinking that the safety is of bicycling out that way has been considered. We have in my condo corporation, we have 38 units and probably 60 bikes in that area. And it looks like they've allocated 20 bike spaces for the GLOW development. And I think that is a recreational area. I don't think that's a reasonable number. And I just think there's going to be some hazards for people crossing the highway, coming up and down Highway 26, and it just doesn't seem safe to me. Thank you.
All right. So that was a really big first call. So we'll move on to the second call for anybody else wishing to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have another person online, Harold Deenan.
Mr. Deenan?
There, sorry, I had to unmute. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Thank you. I live at 475 Mariners Way in Lighthouse Point. I'm on the board of directors for SEC 254. One of my other concerns is that we talk about parking, but we also need to discuss public transit. Currently, the bus stop is on Lighthouse Point property, and I'm curious how the residents of GLOW are going to access public transit when they have to actually walk onto and trespass on Lighthouse Point property.
Point down, thank you. that it, Mr. Deanon? We'll move to the last. Is there someone else on there? Okay. So third and final call for anyone wishing to bring something new to add. Right?
If I may, Madam Chair, we have had a lot of people putting their feedback in the Q&A online. In order for it to qualify as comments to the public application, if you can please submit them in writing to the planning department at jnoel@collingwood.ca.
Right, because they won't qualify in that.
That's correct.
In that space. All right. So just to be clear. All right. So we'll close the public meeting portion and we will move on to, sorry.
I do have one person that just phrased.
They snuck in. All right.
I believe it's Heather Colian.
Heather, go ahead.
Yes, it's Heather Coulihan. I'm also a resident of Lighthouse Point, 928 Cedar Point Court. And I don't need to reiterate all the concerns we have about water and environment and parking. You've heard all of those. I just think that it's sad when a developer pulls a stunt like this. I think it's a slap in the face to council. And I think it's a slap in the face to official planning. And I think you don't want your city managed and planned by a developer. I think that the kind of stunt they're pulling is they've asked for the moon and then they're going to pull back and say, oh, we want to work with you, but they still may get more than the city bylaws or the official plan is set at. And I think you don't need to waste any more time. I think it's disrespectful to the city. And I think that we want good planning. We want smart planning and good community planning by our city councilors and our official planners, not by developers. So that's all I wanted to comment on. I think we want to keep our town lovely. And I think that we definitely need to say no to something so irresponsible. So thank you for your time.
All right. So this is the third and final call and done, sorry. And so we are going to go on to closing the public portion for sure. And now we're going to move on to council questions. Oh, also, I guess I should ask, did staff and the planning wish to respond to anything outside of the public comments at this point? Ms. Nolan?
Thank you. Just a reminder for everyone to please online comments, please put them in writing to myself at jnolan@collingwood.ca. Also, please provide your mailing address or email address. Again, for everybody out in the corridor, if you want to be notified, please write your name and address down on the piece of paper beside me. Thank you, everyone, for coming out tonight. Thank you for your concerns. I have noted them. I will accept them. I'll review them as well as all the technical information. And just to reiterate to everyone tonight, no decision's been made. There will not be a decision made tonight. We're still reviewing all the technical materials. And just so that you're all aware, we will, and we've already started a peer review process, requesting peer reviews of the parking studies, traffic studies, environmental impact study, stormwater management, geotechnical, functional servicing report, and the environmental site assessment. So we're not just relying on our own staff, but we're also having a third-party review, professional engineers and professional environmentalists and so on. Sorry, sorry, in the back, could you please, it's very distracting. Thank you. But we are reviewing these materials and we'll bring this back for a public meeting if there are major changes to the application. So there could potentially be another public meeting if there are amendments to the application in the future.
Okay. Thank you for those additional comments. All right. So before I go to Council Director Valentine, is there anything else I need to check in with? No? Okay. All good. All right. So I'm just looking around the table. I think we've heard a lot of information this evening. Anything further from Council? No? Okay. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll maybe just take a couple of minute pause. I mean, you're welcome to stay to enjoy the rest of the meeting if you wish. Otherwise, we'll bid you a good evening and thank you again for participating.
Well done. Nobody would even notice. Well done.
70% of them can't do anything on that.
Well, you handled it very well. Good.
Just maybe. I think we should wait and see if we want that. You're not concerned. It's always good. Item.
No, you know what?
I've never heard from people that love this.
And I'm just
Yeah, okay. I guess I can't move that table outside, eh?
It's 6 stories.
You can do 50. Oh, that's Joe, great. Gotta go. No, I do. Jab told me.
That don't have yeah.
Let's
I forget.
Your first one? I know, right? Like, first one for the tower. It's like so nervous.
How are you, Ruby?
Is it permitted to come by and say?
Oh, of course you
Cross the line. No.
Yeah. That's like Les Nessman. Don't cross that wall.
How are you, Steve? Good to see you.
No, we appreciate all the feedback. Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah, I think
Thanks for coming out.
it was a really good meeting.
Good to see you, Ruby.
Ruby, I've known Ruby for a few years now.
Okay, everybody stay. Talk about it.
Of course they are. Look at them all.
He teaches skiing at Alpine. My brother found it.
All right, so everyone, we're going to get back to it here.
Really? Wow.
All right, so moving on, that brings us to item number 6 on our agenda, which is staff reports. And I'll invite our treasurer to introduce our auditor. And if that's still too noisy out there, we can maybe ask them to sign quietly. Oh, no. Thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. Other duties as assigned.
I think it's in the fine print, actually.
Yes, somewhere there.
So if I may, I am going to introduce Sue Bragg from Baker Tilly, who is our auditor, and she will walk us through a presentation of our financial statements. And following that, there is a staff report as well to just add to some additional detail. So I will call Sue Bragg.
Okay, thank you.
I thought Monica was going to have to use her mom voice, but
Well, I know you have one of those as well, Mrs. Bragg.
yes,
So.
I do. I do. And when they're 15, you have to use it more often than you used to have to. So here I am. This is my first in-person council presentation since 2019. So it's amazing. And this is my first 2022 council presentation as well. So that's great. So if we could go to the next slide. This is just an introductory slide, really. As you all are probably aware, we're discussing the draft audited financial statements tonight. The goal is to get a quorum of council to approve them so that we can then lift the draft watermark and present them in final form. A copy of the financial statements, of course, go to the ministry along with the financial information return. So that's important to accomplish. And so the date that you see on the audit report is June 19th, because that's the date of our presentation today. It is certainly an unqualified audit opinion, as it has been in the past. The next slide talks about sort of our process. I just want to be clear that, we don't look at every dollar. We don't look at every transaction. Obviously, we come in for a couple of weeks.
Okay. Sorry, Sue, we're just going to have to talk to them one more time. We're having trouble hearing. All right. Sorry. Take it away.
Okay, that's okay. So in terms of the audit process, so you may or may not know, we visit the town twice a year. In the fall, we do what we call our interim audit, and then in the spring, we do what we call our year-end audit. The interim audit is focused on processes and controls. We have extensive documentation on, what the financial systems are of the town. And part of our process is to go and actually test those to make sure that the controls we've documented are actually happening. So that happens in the fall. And then in the wintertime, around March, we come in and do the year-end audit. And that takes a more substantive approach. So we're looking at the balances as at December 31st, because they're, of course, on the statement of financial position that we're going to render our audit opinion on. We look at all of the large numbers. Of course, we set a materiality. And then we audit to that. We also, of course, look at areas that we think might be more risky than others, areas perhaps we have found issues with in the past. And so that's the process, just so that you're aware that, an audit doesn't mean we've looked at every dollar in every transaction. That would mean we have to be here every day. So that's basically how it goes. In 2020 and 2021, some of our audit work was actually done remotely. I remember being on a Zoom call doing an inventory of public works at the end of the year of the water meters and so on. And so Jennifer Graham was panning a camera around the storage room, and I was saying, okay, I want to see how many of those there are. And so, but this year, both of our audits were in person. The other thing to note is that in the last number of years, Treasury staff had prepared their own financial statements, and then we added our audit report. This year, we actually prepped the financial statement, obviously with lots of input from the Treasury staff, but they were generated by us. That was part of the RFP for auditors last year. So the next slide, we get into the financial statements themselves. So this is the consolidated statement of operations, just a snapshot of some of the subtotals. And the area I want to talk about first is the capital and other revenues. You can see there the budget was about 31 million. Actual was about 17 million compared to actual last year of about 9 million. The actual variance is because of the $6.5 million that we received from New Tech for our 18.5% share of the pipeline. That's the main reason for the variance between 21 and 22. In terms of comparison to budget, obviously budgeting capital items is never easy. You never know when a project's going to progress or slow down or get stalled or move ahead. So we often, if there's an area in any municipal statement we're involved with that always seems to vary by millions of dollars, it's typically budget compared to actual for capital and other revenues. The next slide, we talk about a couple of the other variances on the statement of operations. So under revenues, you'll note that net municipal taxation increased about $2 million year over year. And there was also a variance of about $328,000 when compared to budget. And that was mainly because of assessment value increases. Investment income was higher than budget and last year. I don't know that anyone necessarily anticipated the jump in interest rates that we saw, but it was good. User charges were consistent with budget, so that was good. Expenses, the one thing to note, so there wasn't anything notable in that area, but the one thing to note is that in keeping with many municipalities, the town does not budget for amortization expense. And that is always in the $11 to $12 million range. So it was $11.4 million last year, $11.9 million for 2022. And so it's not included in the budget column, but it is certainly included in the actual columns, both 22 and 21. On the next couple of slides, we've just presented some pie charts so that you can see what makes up the majority of your revenue. So obviously, no surprise to anyone, property taxation is a very large percentage of your revenue, followed by user charges. On the next slide, we have expenses, and this is by department. And it's fairly well balanced, actually. You can see protection services, transportation, environmental, and recreation are all within a few points of one another. General government would be one of the smaller pieces of the pie here. And again, consistent with last year. And then the next slide shows the expenses by type. And again, no surprise, the largest piece of the pie there is for salaries and benefits. And again, a consistent percentage with last year. Then on the next page, we look at the statement of financial position. And important to note that this is at a point in time. So this is these are the figures as at December 31st, 2022 compared to December 31st, 2021. And you can see there the breakdown between cash, investments, different receivable lines. And one of the ratios that we look at is the cash ratio. Before I jump into that, when I've shown the figures for the province, low risk, moderate, and high, those are the figures provided to us as of 2021. They haven't compiled all of those numbers for 2022 yet. They can't do that until everybody's FIR is in and they come out later in the fall. So I am comparing your 2022 ratios with their averages for 2021. And so the cash ratio, it's considered low risk if it's more than 0.5, and you're at 2.12, up from 1.35 last year. The other thing I want to mention is that Monica's staff report includes some ratios as well, and you might notice that there are some variations. I tend to pull my figures from the audited financial statement because they're kind of my baby. They're what I'm most familiar with. And she tends to pull from the financial information return. So there are some variances. Her and I have talked about what those differences are and why. And but just to rest assured, you wonder why they're different, and that's why financial statements versus the FIR. I just want to speak for a moment to note 4, which is the investment note. I'm sure many of you noticed when you looked at that, the difference between the book cost of the investments versus what the fair market value was at the end of the year. Obviously, 2022 was a tough year in the markets. We saw this across all of our clients, and it didn't matter if it was an individual or a larger organization. And I certainly would not hold myself out to be any type of an investment expert, because I'm definitely not. But I can tell you that in recent years, organizations like the town and some of our other nonprofits have gotten into the principal protected notes. And I didn't know what they were the first time I saw them. So I've been trying to educate myself on them, and I'm definitely not an expert, but I can tell you that they are, unless there's a colossal bank failure, the principal is protected. So there's no doubt that the cost that's sitting there, the 94 or 95 million, is going to be recovered. There's no issue there at all. But there is a question as to exactly how much investment income is going to be made on those investments, because it's tied to the bank index. And again, if there was an indices to be tied to, typically the banks are one of the industries that do very well. So that's my couple of words on investments. I guess the other thing I will say is that for a municipality, you have to be very conscientious of where you invest. And that means that there's not a lot of options open to you. There's GICs, which are better than they used to be because interest rates are up. There's the principal protected notes. And then there's also bankers acceptance. But it's not like you're in a position to invest in, cryptocurrency or any sort of equity markets that are really volatile. So you are limited in where you can invest your money. The next slide is with regard to taxes receivable. We've compared here not only to what the province tells us is acceptable, but also we do 6 local municipalities, and they range from about 4 to 10%. And the town is certainly lower than that. It was at about 4.2% when you look at taxes receivable as a percentage of taxes levied. The next slide shows a snapshot of the liabilities at the end of the year compared to last year. And we'll go to the very next slide because that is one of the biggest figures, or actually is the biggest figure in the liability section of the Statement of Financial Position. And this is the deferred revenue related to obligatory reserve funds. So the balance was about 53 million compared to about 50 million the year before. The lion's share of that, almost $45 million, is in development charges. And so those development charges don't sit in a reserve or a reserve fund. They're actually recorded on the Statement of Financial Position as a liability. If for some reason the town was not going to spend those monies, it would have to be returned, and it doesn't get recognized as revenue until it's used. So that's different than some of your other reserves and reserve funds. The second largest item there, of course, is federal gas tax. We get funding from the government to spend on mainly transportation-related projects. And so that figure has consistently been in the $4 million range the last couple of years. And again, if that doesn't get spent for what the Federal Gas Tax Act says we can spend it on, then it has to get returned. So that's why it's recorded as a liability, not a reserve or a reserve fund. The next slide is net financial assets. And you'll notice that figure about 2/3 of the way down the statement of financial position. And it also ties to the statement of changes in net financial position 2 pages after that. And that's all by design, not by coincidence. So net financial assets were about 53 million compared to 45 million last year. And it's interesting because the province considers as long as you have a negative 50%, like you're in net debt, they think that you're low. They think that you're low risk. Of course, the provincial average is about 43% positive, and we sit at about 84%. Last year was about 74%. I know when Monica did the calculation of that same ratio, hers was a little bit lower than that. But I looked at the $6.5 million from the sale of the New Tech pipeline differently than she did. I did not include that in our operating revenues because I think it's a one-time. It's a one-time revenue. The next page, we're getting into a couple of slides here on tangible capital assets. So these are the bricks and mortar and the equipment and the infrastructure that the town owns. It was a big figure. It was almost 233 million at the end of 2022. And important to note that that figure is based on historical cost and then amortized over the estimated useful life. So that is not what it would cost to replace all of your bricks and mortar and infrastructure. That is at historical cost, amortized over estimated useful life. It definitely does also not represent replacement cost of those assets. And one of the ratios the ministry likes us to look at is the asset consumption ratio. So how old are your assets is really what this is measuring. And it's saying, you're low risk if it's 50% or lower. And we're at about 42%, which is consistent with last year. And also just a smidge better than what the provincial average is. The next slide shows by type of tangible capital asset. So if you were to look at this, one of the middle ones, the machinery and equipment, it shows that, on the average, the machinery and equipment is older than, say, the vehicles or the linear assets because more of it has been amortized, 59% compared to only 43%, say, for linear assets. And I should mention the linear assets are roads, sewer lines, water lines. That's what fits into the definition of linear assets. The next page, of course, anyone that's been around the council table for a few years knows this is note 13, accumulated surplus is my favorite note. When the format of the financial statements changed a number of years ago, and we no longer kind of had a balance sheet and it came down to this accumulated surplus figure, there was so much misinformation about what is that? Oh my gosh, look, it's $286 million. The town's rich. They don't need to charge me taxes anymore. But that's not it at all. The accumulated surplus is basically the difference between all of your assets and all of your liabilities. And of course, you can see from this slide that the majority of that is tied up in tangible capital assets. And so 222 million of that 286 million is related to tangible capital assets. And then, of course, there are also the reserve balances. So they were about 72 million at the end of 22 compared to 66 million the year before. Another ratio that the province looks at is the reserves as a percentage of operating expenses. And they consider anything higher than 20% low risk. We are, and the provincial average is 87%. And we are at about 116%, up slightly from 114 last year. And then the next slide, there's just, I know that the agenda packages are so long. And so, if you only had time to look at 4 notes, of course, you would look at note 13, because that's my favorite note, accumulated surplus. And then you might look at these 3. So a note 11B talks about the liability for contaminated site, the terminals. Note 19 is the commitment regarding the new water treatment plant. And then last but not least is note 21 that talks about the New Tech pipeline sale. On the terminals, we started out in 2018 with a $5 million figure. And if you go back to the report, I don't know, I'm not sure if I'm going to remember the name of the firm. I think it was Tacoma that did a report on the terminals. They shared that the liability, if you were to demolish the terminals, was about $5 million. If you were to try and remediate it, it was in the $8 to $10 million range. And I guess I sort of stand back and I look at it and I think, well, council hasn't made a decision on what to do with the terminals. Obviously, we're very hopeful that that development is going to take place there. And so I've chosen, or we've decided that $8 million is sort of a fair figure when you look at the two options. Could you argue that it should be increased? Well, sure, you could. I guess I'm comfortable with the $8 million. Also in knowing that, I don't think there's a law out there that says council has to make a decision. So there's some doubt as to whether it's going to be demolished or just maintained or, redeveloped and remediated. So that's where we landed on the 8 million. As I say, in 2018, it was 5 million. In 2019, we increased it to 8 million and it's sort of sat there. For the financial statement presentation, if we were to increase that, it would definitely show as an expense. But then it would move into the accumulated surplus note as an unfunded liability. So it wouldn't change the way you set tax rates or anything like that. It would, so that's my explanation for the 8 million. And I'm almost done. I want to thank, I have two staff that spend way more time on your file than I do. Zach Telfer and Emily Irwin. And then, of course, Jennifer Graham and Monica Quinlan. We couldn't do it without them because all of the information comes from them. And so thank you very much to all of those folks. I will certainly entertain any questions you may have. If they're really hard, I might have to defer to Monica. Or if they're really detailed and not about the audit itself.
Okay. Thank you, Sue. I'm just going to ask the treasurer, did you want to do your comments first before we went to all the questions, or did you want the questions for the auditor right now?
Well, thank you, Chair. I think it's probably better if I present.
Okay.
I'm just going to add a little bit of commentary.
All right. So that just means our auditor is kindly
She
going to
wants-
stay a little bit longer.
She
Okay.
wants to stay. She already told me that. But I'll be quick because I'm actually not going to put a presentation together. Sue's done, such a great job with all the details. And likewise, our staff is extremely grateful to her staff because they help us carry along through these wonderful periods of time in the world called audits. And it can be stressful and trying to get things through, but her team is very, very reliable and very helpful. And I think every year we get a little bit better. So thank you to Baker Tilly as well. So since we've had that thorough review, I'm just going to sort of highlight what was included in the staff report. You'll notice what I focus on in the staff report are the financial indicators that Sue has mentioned that her and I might have a little bit of a different amount. And I just want to clarify, the FIR is the financial information return that we provide to the province on an annual basis. Every municipality does so. It's a sort of Excel-based template that goes out to all 444 municipalities, and the information needs to be completed and submitted to the province every year. What's different about the way Sue calculates the numbers or let me rephrase that, the Baker Tilly calculates the indicators versus the province is that the province is, because it's a Excel sort of template that goes across all those municipalities, it's very rigid. And I think the way that we've calculated some of the numbers, and I'll talk to them as we go through them, directly from the financial statements, they have a little bit more reasonableness because you're looking at things like the 6.5 million as a one-time amount. It's nice to be able to remove that. But when I calculate the indicators based on the FIR calculations or formulas, I can't just pull that out because the numbers are relayed to a specific cell in a giant 80-page Excel document. So just to be clear, that's the difference. They're still based on the financial statements and they balance to the financial statements. It's just very rigid. So just, keep that in mind. So the analysis that I've prepared in the staff report will show that the town continues to be in a healthy financial position. I think this positioning and is vital given the increased pressure, mostly with respect to asset management and infrastructure needs as we progress through the next several years. It certainly doesn't mean that we're done our work and we can just rest on our laurels and leave, everything's good and it will stay that way. It's very important for us to continue to make those strides, and council's aware of the types of situations in terms of our asset management and where our infrastructure needs are. So there's still a lot of work to do, but certainly very thankful that over the last several years and in, continuing on in this year, that council's made some really great decisions with respect to our financial situation. It's also important that when we look at any financial information that we put it into context and that we review many layers of financial information or financial details that are available. These indicators that we're going to, quickly go over aren't meant to be reviewed on a single basis. One number or one indication or one ratio doesn't tell you the financial health of a municipality or any organization for that matter. Together, the indicators that the province issues or that they use to measure us is how we make informed decisions along with many other pieces of documentation and understanding and reasonableness. So to start off, the report that's in front of you or that's included in the agenda it issues or looks at the two types of indicators that the province uses to measure the financial health of the town. The first of which is sustainability indicators. And in this context, these can be seen as the degree to which the town can maintain its existing financial obligations, both in respect of its service commitments to the public and their financial commitments both to the creditors and their employees and others, without inappropriately affecting debt or tax burden relative to the economy that we live in. So essentially all it's saying is, how can we react to, or how can we maintain our financial situation without unduly affecting our taxpayers or our ratepayers? So that's what sustainability means in this context. There are 4 sustainability indicators, and I'm happy to say that in all of the categories, the town is considered to be in the low risk range, given the current financial situation that we are in today. And I think that's extremely important. And I think Sue also mentioned it, that it's about today and now. Financial statements are a point in time. They don't project the future. That's what we do when we look at budgets and forecasts and we start to plan through our major plans. But it is a point in time. Again, we're very well positioned, but it doesn't mean that the work is done. I'll also note that in the document, or pardon me, in the report, you'll see that there's a little asterisk beside 2022, and that's also because the 2022 averages and medians aren't issued yet from the province. We won't see those sometimes until February of next year, but hopefully in the fall sometime as well. So the first sustainability indicator that Sue also talked about, so I'm going to just skip kind of quickly over it, is the total taxes receivable as a percentage of total taxes levied. And all that means is the amount of taxes that are billed that aren't collected yet as a percentage of the total amount that's levied. We are in the low risk range at 4.7%, and it was interesting to see that other municipalities in the area are around us, a little bit higher, not significantly so, but we're certainly lower than the average at 5.5%. One thing that I think is important when we talk about this ratio, though, is that it's really important to give consideration to the fact that any outstanding taxes, there is interest collected. So there's a really delicate balance between being extremely strict on how we collect taxes, albeit we have standards and a very robust system that's included in the tax department right now. But we also have to consider the fact that there is interest that's collected on that as well, and in fact it's at about 15% per year. So when we look at that factor, we're weighing both pieces to say, yes, we want to be accountable and make sure that we maintain a relatively good ratio, but we also want to be fair and work with our taxpayers as much as possible. So that's sort of the plan that the finance department has done so far. The next indicator is net financial assets as a percentage of own source revenues. I think, again, we'll talk about Sue and I have a little bit of a difference here. In her numbers, she's been able to remove the 6.5 million, and then that we received from New Tech for the interest on the pipeline. I wasn't able to do that because, again, it's a very rigid document, and I have to put the numbers where the numbers go. So my number is slightly lower by about 9%, albeit we're still far and away in the very low risk range for this ratio as well. And this basically tells us how much of our property tax and user fee revenue is servicing our debt. At this point, we are in a net positive position, or a net asset position, as we would say. But again, as Sue mentioned, the province looks at it that if you are in a deficit position or a liability position of around 50%, you're still considered to be at a low risk. So also important. We also looked at the total reserves and discretionary reserve funds as a percentage of municipal expenses. And again, that's just an indicator that measures how much money we have set aside for our future needs and our contingencies. The province sees the low risk threshold at anything greater than 20%. We're at 117.7. But again, as we discussed at the beginning of this report or this discussion, it's important to remember that this is a position at a point in time. And when I go into our next report on reserves and reserve funds, we talk a little bit more about that. So I won't get too far into that right now. The last sustainability indicator is the cash ratio. At the end of 2022, the town is at a cash ratio of 4.08 to 1, which again, very low risk. This indicator measures the amount of cash and liquid investments that's available for us to cover our current obligations. So, oftentimes in private practice, we would say that's the current ratio. So it's anything in the provinces between 0.5 to 1 is considered very low risk, and we're 4 times that amount. You will note that there's a considerable change from prior years in this ratio, largely because we have moved a lot of funds out of the bank account and into investments to try and increase the interest received on any of those funds that aren't required over the next several years. So the second type of indicators that the province uses are flexibility indicators. Now, in this context, it's the degree to which the town can change its debt or tax level to meet its existing financial obligations. And again, both in respect of service commitments to the public and financial commitments to creditors. It really provides a lot of insight in how the town manages its finances. Because sometimes increasing taxation or rates, or user fees, I should say, can reduce the town's flexibility to respond to adverse circumstances, but it allows us to make sure that when we're looking at these flexibility indicators, that we can react to those moments in time where, maybe catastrophic events occur. There are 3 indicators for flexibility that the province uses. The first is the debt servicing costs as a percentage of total revenues. And this indicator measures how much of each dollar is allocated to existing debt. I'll say that council has worked very hard over the last several years to reduce this amount and is now below 5% in 2022. Now, I'll note that there also has not been any new debt issued since 2016. So the last 8 years or so has been spent making payments towards principal, which we always enjoy, and thus reducing those overall debt revenues. But it's significant to say that it's the first time the town has been included in the low risk classification in many years, and it's quite an accomplishment. But as we move forward through our long-term financial strategy and a little bit more about debt as we go on, there will be more details coming forward. The next indicator is the consumption ratio of assets. Sue did touch on that as well. And it essentially just measures how much of the asset's life expectancy has been consumed so far. We're still in the low risk range, but you can start to see over the years, we're starting to creep up. Towards more of the moderate levels. We're certainly not moving towards the high levels yet, But this is largely because as assets age and need replacement or rehabilitation, we have been having difficulty keeping pace with that, which again, the AMP speaks to, or the asset management speaks to as well. So finally, we have the annual surplus as a percentage of own source revenues. And this indicator measures the municipality's ability to cover its operational costs and then still have some funds available to put away for specific purposes, like debt repayment, which is what the council had done in the past, include in reserves or in contingency situations. The town, again, is an extremely low risk level. It's at more than 25 times higher than the low risk threshold for 2022, but there's a large jump from 2021, and it's because of the 18.5% sale to new tech. So if I were to take that out, that would bring us down to 18% rather than 25%, and would be, pretty close to where we were last year, a little bit better than it was. So I think that wraps up my comments. So I think I'll ask Sue to join me back up here, and then her and I can tackle any questions or clarity you may need.
Right on. Okay, so how we are, just for everyone's benefit here, we're going to go to the public first and see if they have questions. And then we're going to put the motion on the floor, and then we'll have council's questions. And for those who are here for item 6.3, you've been waiting patiently, and so we don't think we need the auditor for 6.2. So what I'm going to propose to do, if planning staff will be ready as soon as we finish the audited financial statements agenda item, we will move up 6.3 and then move into 6.2 thereafter. Everybody clear? Okay, great. So let's, Deputy Clerk, is there anyone first of all in the gallery wishing to speak to the financial statements? I know, it's good, fun stuff. All right. Deputy Clerk Dahl, is there anybody online?
Thank you, Madam Chair. If there's anyone online that wishes to speak to the staff report, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And there's no one wishing to speak at this time.
Okay, that's great. All right, so then I will read the motion. The staff report T 2023-12, the 2022 audited financial statements be received for information, and that the 2022 audited financial statements be hereby approved. I have a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Potts, Councillor Perry. All right, so now questions for the treasurer and or the auditor. Who all would wish to speak? Can you just show me right at the top? One speaker? All right. Deputy Mayor?
Thank you. And as you noted, it's been a long evening already, and I had a collection of questions I've prepared. I don't think that's a surprise to either of you. But I was going to start out by saying I was going to try to take advantage of talking to the 100/65 people that were here and tell them that they should stick around, and they'd get a very informative presentation, and that's what was delivered, and thank you very much for that. So I wanted to start out by thanking External Auditor Bragg for the service in conjunction with Collingwood staff to provide the statements and the summarized public presentation. It's excellent work as always, and my comments are really just an extension of it, just trying to figure out ways to make sure the public understand what we're reporting to them. And as I said, I had some prepared comments, but I had some questions come up with comments that you had made through your presentation. So I was going to address those first, if that's okay. When we talked about the price or principal protected notes, your one comment was, unless there's a colossal bank here, and I just had to think about the U.S. situation coming to people's minds. But I was just going to say to either of you, the Canadian banking system is completely different. I have every confidence that the principal is protected, that there's not going to be that type of situation in Canada. But I just thought getting comments from yourselves would be helpful as well. Well, Monica and I actually had a discussion about this earlier today, because her comment was that the part of the reason that we see a decline in the market value is because of what has been happening with the banks in the U.S. I mean, there were I don't know, 3 or 4 or 5, maybe more of their smaller banks that failed. And that has put pressure on the value of the principal protected notes, even though I agree with you 100%. There's no issue with any of the Canadian banks. That's my only comment.
That's great. If the treasurer wanted to add anything, but
If I can, Chair, through you to Deputy Mayor Fryer. Yeah, so it is true that we definitely have two different banking systems, but the general public doesn't always understand that. And when things happen in the U.S., for good or for bad, they have a reflection on what happens in Canada as well. So that is a big part of why we saw that market value go up. Now, again, we weren't in these investments to play the market, so to speak. They were settled to maintain the integrity of the principal, which I have no concern about whatsoever, and to hopefully gain a few points in terms of interest as well. The one thing I'll note that Sue had mentioned is, yeah, if all 6 of our major banks collapse, that would likely not, we wouldn't see the principal necessarily, but that would mean a lot of different things and would mean, a big colossal problem in Canada in general. But that would also be true for GICs or any funds we have in the bank account, or, and it goes on and on and on. So I think certainly have a lot of faith in our banking system, but it did have an impact. When the U.S. has a little bit of a blip, it impacts us too, unfortunately. But again, we're not concerned with that because we're in it for the long haul and we weren't planning on selling. So that's the big thing.
and through you, Chair, a follow-up then through the chair.
Sure.
This was about the $6.5 million. And you did a great job of explaining, because one of the things I noticed right off was a difference in the slide from the external auditor compared to yours. But you had already explained that internally to the emails that we had sent. But you mentioned it quite extensively to the public, and I think that was really important to make them understand that that was a one-time amount that came in, and the reason for the difference in your report to the other reports. So I do have a number of questions surrounding the 6.5, but I do what I'm going to be asking is that council consider allowing that. I do intend on taking some questions offline. And that may involve the offers being made by the treasurer, that it could involve meeting with the treasurer and the external auditor and perhaps the CAO if she wants to, and anybody else. But I'd want to have council approval to do that going forward, because we're just at the committee of the whole here. They still will come to council in 2 weeks. So I'm sure we can sort through those other things that I was wanting to address. And the 6.5, as I say, there's a few questions in that regard. The other thing I thought maybe would take an opportunity. One of the confusing things about the purchase or the price protected notes and note 4 is there's quite a bit of reference to callable maturity, percentages of maturities, and things like that. It may be helpful, in my opinion, to elaborate a little bit on what those things are, even though we know, as we said, the principle is protected, right?
If I may, Chair, through you to Deputy Mayor Fryer. So yeah, there's lots of different terms that are associated with the PPNs, and we covered a little bit of it in our investment report, but just for the public, a callable PPN, or principal protected note, is essentially an agreement that says if the index, the bank index that we are invested in, is greater than what. Okay, let me start that over, because so it's if. When we buy the principal protected notes, let me start there. When we buy the principal protected notes, the bank index is at a certain percent. So let's just say that's at 1%, which means that all the stocks of the 6 major banks are accumulated and they are at 1%. Some of the principal protected notes are auto-callable, which means at different periods of time, some are at 4, some are at 7 years. If at the 4-year mark or the 7-year mark, for example, that index has increased from 1 to even 1.01, the banks have the right to call the principal protected note and pay the interest up to that point. So that's what auto-callable means. Maturity date is just that. That's when the very end of the principal protected note is ready to be dissolved, and the principal plus any interest that would be accumulated would be payable to the town. So that's at any investment has a maturity date, just like if you invested in a GIC. If it was an annual GIC and you registered it today on June 19th, 2024, you would get your money back plus the interest you earned. Principal protected note, no difference when it comes to maturity. You'll also note that there's an item in there called participation. So there's a factor in the PPNs, and I'm going to shorten it a little bit so you don't hear it too much, that's called participation. And many of the notes that are not callable or are not auto-callable, to entice investors and to make things a little bit more attractive, they increased your participation in terms of the value of percent of interest you would receive. So, for example, if we went back to the 1%, if the index was at 1%, which it's certainly not, but if it was, to keep numbers real, and at the time of maturity, it was at 1.25, the participation rate is based on the difference between those two numbers. So the 0.25, and in some cases, the participation rate might be 200%. We would receive 0.25 times 200%. So that would mean we would get more than double in that case, of what the index has increased by. So it makes them a little bit more attractive, makes you sort of want to hold them for a longer period of time. I'll also note that we did do a big presentation back in the previous council, and I think it might make sense that we do another presentation to the current council, even as a departmental update, to share what PPNs are all about and why we chose those and what the real attraction to them is. But I will say that we did an extensive amount of research to figure out where the best bang for our buck would be. And it certainly led us down the path to these. And you'll note, as Sue had mentioned, more and more municipalities, more and more nonprofits are moving into this market because GICs for so long were so, there was really just bad. So this was an alternate market to get into. Certainly things have changed again, but none of us are Nostradamus, so we don't know that they're going to change until they change, of course. So at any rate, I think I've covered that.
If I may, Chair, you've touched into an area that I was thinking about when I was looking at this and thinking about the explanation. Because as you say, this is 2022, but we're probably moving into stages where we have to consider things like borrowing for major projects that are going to be undertaken. And we've got money sitting here and we've got borrowing requirements. So what are we best to do? Internal borrowing, we have not been doing it in the last few years. We've got it actually spent right and cleaned right up, but interest rates are climbing. And so I do think it would be a good exercise to go through with the Treasury Department to give us kind of a 101 training session on that aspect of things as we move forward, because I do think that there's going to be some decisions that have to be made in the near future in that regard. So again, I was going to end off with requesting that it's okay that I take my further questions offline, and possibly for certain deal with the treasurer and the CAO, but possibly the auditor as well, if that's of approval by council.
All right. So I don't think we have to do any kind of formal as the committee, remembering that this recommendation, what we're voting on, is to go to council at its next meeting, and you'll do your meetings over that next time. And if you want to bring back a report on the answers to your questions and your consultation outside of this, that's great. So we don't have any problems with that. I'm not seeing anything from your colleagues here, so you're good to go. All right, so on the motion, any other further discussion? Mayor Hamlin.
I just really wanted to say thank you to our auditor and to our treasurer and to all the staff that have made us look so good here with these amazing financial statements for 2022. And I do appreciate we have lots of infrastructure spending ahead of us and all kinds of loans and debentures and headaches coming, but it's so nice to be able to sit here and say thank you.
For sure. Yes. Yes. So I also extend my appreciation. I did send my questions through and I got my answers earlier today. So I'll continue to follow up on those. All right. So without any further discussion, then I will call for the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much, everybody. Awesome. All right. So as promised, we are going to move to 6.3. And the process here will be that we will have a presentation by Director Valentine, and then we will have a presentation by the planning agent, and then we will go to the public, and then we will put the motion on the floor, and then we'll have council questions, and then we will vote. So, Director Valentine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The presentation will be provided by Senior Planner Wu Cash, but if I may add some introductory remarks, since we do still have people in the gallery, and I understand about a dozen online who are interested in this proposal, which does represent infill within established neighborhoods. So understandably, when this type of change is proposed, there's significant interest from surrounding residents, many of whom did attend the public meeting in 2020 and also who wrote to staff after this particular agenda was posted last week. The file at this point is now progressed to where the technical and land use planning reviews have been completed, and staff are going to be making a recommendation to committee, which will move through to council for ratification. If I may provide some clarification around the process questions that were raised by the public in emails to us in advance of the report. There was certainly concern around the provision of notice for the staff report that is here before you today. Under the Planning Act, municipalities are required to provide formal notice of public meeting as well as a notice of decision after one has been made by council. And these are both very clear requirements under the Act. The town of Collingwood, however, does go above and beyond these legislative provisions and circulates a courtesy notice of the staff recommendation report once it's posted publicly to all of those who participated in the public meeting or submitted written comments, as long as we have a valid email address on file. We do understand that although this is not a public meeting under the Planning Act, there are a number of individuals who may wish to speak to the report through the town's process of allowing commentary on every report that is provided at open session and committee of the whole. I would also just like to inform those who are here with us today that a formal notice of decision will be circulated to those of which we have email addresses or home addresses on our file. So if we do not have that for you and you wish to have a notice of decision, community or Senior Planner Wukash, who's standing at the podium and who's available by calling or emailing our office, would be happy to take down your information to ensure that you get notice if you wish one. Today, this committee will be making a recommendation on these applications to council, and that decision would be intended to be ratified on July 10th. And at this point, at that point, that's when the notice of decision would go out, and there would be a 20-day appeal period triggered. So those who did provide verbal comments at the public meeting or who had written to staff as part of this application as it's progressed would receive that type of notice. I would indicate that a verbal comment today at this, because this is not a statutory meeting under the Planning Act, does not preserve your appeal rights. So if you are speaking today and you want to preserve your appeal rights for this particular application, again, make sure to follow up with Senior Planner Wukash so that he has the appropriate information where you can be provided the notice of decision. Staff have certainly taken into account the public feedback that we have received so far. We've reviewed the proposal in the context of provincial and municipal land use planning instruments and are ethically required to provide a professional opinion to committee and council that's in line with these frameworks. Staff have certainly also considered the unique circumstances of this site and would remind committee and members of the public that subdivisions like the one that we are discussing today are essentially completed in 2 phases. The first stage is to provide what's called draft approval, and there's a number of conditions that would need to be satisfied by the applicant around technical matters and design elements before proceeding to the second phase. And there's also a time limit on the applicant in terms of how much time is permitted before that draft approval will lapse if the conditions are not appropriately addressed. The second stage does involve a legal agreement with the municipality. It does come back to you as council for endorsement, and that would include the confirmation of the timing of when servicing capacity allocation would be provided for this proposal, and that would be undertaken through the batch review process under the servicing capacity allocation policy before the proponent is able to move forward to register the lots and begin construction. So today we are at the first phase, and Senior Planner Wukash will provide you more details about the proposal and the next steps. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senior Planner Wukash, take it away.
Thank you, Director Valentine, and good evening, Madam Chair, committee, and members of the public that are both in the audience today and participating online. I'll provide a presentation today to summarize Report P 2023-20 for the proposed plan of subdivision and zoning amendment for 50 Saunders Street. Next slide, please. To provide some context, the property is 4 hectares in size, located in the south end of the community. It's abutting the municipal boundary with Clearview Township. So the site is at the northwest corner of Poplar Side Road, which is also known as County Road 32, as it is a road of county jurisdiction, and Saunders Street, and is surrounded by existing plans of subdivision with St. Mary's School property to the north. The more recent development called Mountain Croft is to the west, which has similar lot sizes to the proposed plan, and the Finley Drive subdivision located to the east was created in the early 1970s and contains larger single detached dwelling lots. Next slide, please. So the formal planning applications were received in January 2020, right before the pandemic hit, and a statutory public meeting was held virtually on July 27th of that year. Technical review comments were received from internal departments and external agencies, and many comments were received from members of the public as well. The applicant subsequently revised the plan to increase the lot sizes of those lots backing onto the lots on Garbett Crescent, which is the west side of the plan, and for those lots fronting onto Saunders Street towards the east side of the plan. This resulted in a reduction in the number of lots proposed from 64 to 62 lots. And that is, you can see the draft plan in Appendix A to the staff report. So staff have prepared conditions of draft approval, which are required to be fulfilled before final approval and registration of the plan. Those are attached to the report as Appendix B. And after the posting of this report, the applicant did submit a subdivision plan that was slightly adjusted to widen a walkway at the town's request to 4 meters from 3 meters, which was noted in the recommendation in the staff report before you today. So Appendix C also has a zoning bylaw amendment that accompanies the subdivision to implement the plan. And today is our presentation of recommendations, as Director Valentine noted. Next slide, please. So the official plan designates the property as low-density residential, which permits between 15 and 20 units per hectare. It should be noted that this plan at 15 units per hectare is the lowest possible density that could be proposed on the property, while still in conformity with the town's official plan. So the official plan does not allow for less homes or a lower density on this property. Next slide, please. So the existing R2 zoning on the property allows for single detached dwellings, semi-detached dwellings, and duplexes. This same zone applies to the lots to the east of this plan, while the lots to the west are zoned in the R3 and R3 exception categories. Next slide, please. So this is a depiction of the proposed draft zoning amendment. The proposed R3, 71, and 72 exception zones would limit the uses on the property to single detached dwellings with a minimum frontage of 12 meters, which is 40 feet. The two R3 exception zones are identical except for the addition of an increased rear yard setback to 9 meters for those lots backing onto Poplar Side Road. The same zone provisions apply to the Mountain Croft lots that back onto Poplar as well to the west of this plan. Next slide, please. So the proposed holding symbol, just on the previous slide, the pond, there is a park and a pond in the central area of the development. You can see the light bluish color is the parkland that represents 5% of the area of the project. And then the green area is a stormwater management pond that will be a dry pond, and it's integrated into the central recreational kind of facility. So thank you. Next slide, please. The proposed holding symbol for this property, the H20 that would apply, is very similar to existing holding provisions that apply to the property. They've just been slightly adjusted. There would be an application to remove the holding symbol prior to a building permit being issued for the lands. And the conditions of removing that holding symbol are confirmation of services having been installed and a decision to allocate servicing capacity by council. And secondly, to the execution of a subdivision agreement with the town. Slide, please. As noted, the proposed plan was revised to increase the lot frontages to 13.7 meters or 45 feet for the lots backing onto Garbutt Crescent and fronting onto Saunders Street. At the south end of the plan, you'll see the orange and the purple or pink block, which represent a road widening and a daylighting triangle on Poplar Side Road. Those blocks will be dedicated to the county and will contain an extension of the trail along that road to Saunders Street. And where the trail continues north on Saunders Street, it will be determined through a detailed design how that trail looks like and how it will connect to the trail along Stevens Street. So as I mentioned, that central stormwater management pond and park block are integrated with 3 access points. And you can see the walkway on the west side of that central area is the one that will be widened. Next slide, please. So there were a series of supporting documents provided through the application process, and I'll just highlight a few. An environmental impact study did not identify any significant natural heritage features or species at risk on the lands and was agreed to by the MVCA. A phase 1 and 2 environmental site assessment were completed, in part in response to concerns raised at the public meeting, to address any potential contamination of the lands from a former railway line along the west portion of the property. The resulting chemical analyses indicated that the soil samples meet the applicable Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks standards, and the town peer-reviewed those reports and confirmed those results. A preliminary tree inventory, the environmental impact study, and a butternut assessment all confirmed that there were no significant woodlands on the site, and existing trees are generally invasive and of poor quality, and further confirmed that there are few, if any, opportunities to retain existing trees into the development due to grading requirements for servicing and stormwater drainage. A preliminary traffic impact study also supported the draft plan and suggested minimal impacts to the existing road network. Next slide, please. So the conditions that would apply to this plan of subdivision that would have to be completed before a registration or the next step, as Director Valentine mentioned, are extensive. I will highlight a few of them for council's interest. From a servicing standpoint, the conditions provide a commitment to allocate servicing capacity for 62 SDU or single dwelling unit equivalents of water capacity and 122 SDU of wastewater at a later date, subject to additional council approval. There are some external works on the site that are going to be have to be completed, including the trail along Poplar, potential improvements to the intersection of Saunders and Poplar Side Road, pending a final traffic impact study that will be completed as a condition of approval. And a traffic calming study is a requirement of the development as well. From a grading standpoint, a suitable grading plan is required to be to meet the town's satisfaction prior to final approval. Particularly for the west limits of the property that abut the lots on Garbett Crescent. Right now, the majority of the abutting lots on Garbett Crescent have a slope in the backyard to the property line. The applicant has completed a preliminary grading solution that would match grades with the existing lots to the west. That would provide more usable backyard space for those abutting lots, subject to agreement from those residents to allow the developer to fill and grade on their properties. The developer has been working on an agreement with residents, which involves financial offers for backyard landscaping and compensation to those residents that have already completed grading work on their property. The town won't be a party to that agreement. It will be between the individual property owners and the developer to agree on a solution that satisfies them both. However, the town must be satisfied that with the eventual grading design and that it makes proper engineering standards. So the plan does provide for a dedication of the park block that does represent 5% of the lands, which will be integrated, as I mentioned, and naturalized with native trees and shrubs with walkways through it. As I mentioned, the traffic study will also be required to be updated. And from a housing affordability standpoint, the project does not propose any affordable housing. However, the developer has offered to rough in about 5% of the units for accessory dwelling units, which could provide for rental housing opportunities at a later date. And finally, there will be urban design and architectural design reports that are finalized as a condition of approval as well. Next slide, please. So from a servicing standpoint, major development applications are required to complete a merit-based scoring evaluation through the town's servicing capacity allocation policy. That's called, we refer to that as the SCAP. The SCAP has separated or decoupled planning applications from allocation decisions through the semi-annual major development batching process. The recommendation today is not for a decision to provide allocation. That's a separate decision by council at a later date. And what this is a conditional commitment to allocate in the future if the project proceeds in a timely manner. So from the evaluation standpoint, the applicant self-evaluated at a score of 64%. Staff's review was 44%. Which is shy of the minimum 50% of the available points generally required for staff to recommend that council consider a commitment to capacity. The difference in points is generally attributed to subtle scoring reductions across a number of the different categories. And the applicant's justification notes that the small-scale infill development results in challenges to receive points in a number of these categories, including infrastructure, connectivity, and housing type and mix. Next slide, please. So from a planning analysis standpoint, the plan of subdivision and zoning amendment, are consistent with the provincial policy statement and conform with applicable growth plan, county official plan, and town official plan policies. The residential dwelling unit types and lot sizes are considered appropriate in the local context, and the developer has worked to address concerns raised through public consultation, which resulted in the amendments to the plan to achieve more consistent size lots with abutting residential neighborhoods. So staff's opinion is that the project represents good planning, and the recommendation is to draft approve the plan of subdivision and pass the zoning amendment. as the density and proximity to existing built-up areas support the achievement of contextually appropriate infill development, compact urban form, municipal-wide greenfield density targets, and a complete communities framework. So it has been supported by other agencies and advances active transportation and park and stormwater infrastructure that will be naturalized. Next slide, please. So this slide just highlights a few of the amendments that will come forward to council with the on July the 10th. The first is a recommendation not to redline it. We don't need to do that anymore. We do have a revised plan that you'll see in the next iteration of the report. There will be a clarification of conditions of approval that relate to the future trail along Saunders Street and how it connects to Stevens Street. And not necessarily the details, but just having the language in there that there needs to be that connection and to clarify that. And Steph did send a courtesy note, as Director Valentine mentioned, to advise residents of this report coming forward. So we did receive approximately 11 or 12 additional correspondence since the posting of the agenda, expressing a variety of concerns, including some of those previously expressed at the public meeting in 2020. So in an amended report, we will link to all of the body of comments that have been received through the consultation process for this development. Next slide, please. So before addressing some of those recent comments, I'll just speak briefly to the next steps. So as Director Valentine mentioned, this is a two-stage process. The draft plan approval is a conditional approval that requires the developer to satisfy a number of requirements that need to be completed before the next stages of approval. And those conditions would have to be satisfied to this to meet the county, the town, and the MVCA and other bodies, such as technical engineering drawings and other reports that need to be finalized. So council's decision on zoning would occur now, but would be subject to that holding symbol that I mentioned that requires those conditions to be met. And as noted earlier, there is another decision point for water allocation through that semi-annual batching process. So staff's professional opinion is that this project does represent good planning, and the applicant has more work to do to satisfy conditions if council sees fit to approve this plan prior to any site alteration, grading, or construction. So that leads into some of the comments we did receive very recently. The general flavor of those were around the timing of tree cutting and construction, maintaining a tree buffer, traffic and traffic calming, trail connections, density, and servicing allocation. So I've spoken about a lot of those already today, but I do want to be clear about the tree cutting timing and construction. That this conditional approval does not give permission for trees to be cut or for construction to commence. The draft plan conditions require a tree cutting permit and tree preservation plan prior to any site alteration. And a preliminary tree assessment, as I mentioned, did indicate that the trees were generally invasive and would likely not be able to be kept largely because of the filling required to meet stormwater and grading requirements for this plan. So the developer will be planting new native trees in the streets, parks, and pond blocks to be specific or to be specified in landscaping plans that are going to be produced as a condition. And there is also a requirement for a construction management plan that the developer will need to provide. So in conclusion, thank you for the opportunity to provide a summary of the report, and we're here to answer any technical questions that you may have. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Senior Planner. So now we'll invite the planning agents up. I'm assuming Mr. Travis and team have some comments they wanted to present.
Again, thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening to you and members of the committee. Madam Clerk, for the record, my name is Colin Travis, the planning consultant of record working with the owners on this file. Speaking of the owners, I have with me Mr. Al Allendorf. He's been with me since 2:00 this afternoon watching the proceedings, and he did tell me that it's quite an educational process. And Madam Chair, you're right. If people could stick around, it would be an amazing lesson in civics. It might be required, I think, should be required attending. But to cut to the chase, I can add to the planning comments that Nathan, Planner Wukash put in his staff report. He went through it quite thoroughly. The staff report addresses the issues that were raised during this process. We began this process in September of 2019 through the pre-com process. We've amended reports. We've provided additional reports. We've responded and respected the peer reviews from the town, from the agency comments, and I think at the back end of Nathan's report is a summary of the public comments that we had back in 2020. There are two things, I suppose, just to reiterate, is that we did amend the original draft plan. We took out two lots, one along Saunders, and the reason for that is to increase the frontage of the lots fronting onto Saunders. In addition, we increased the lot widths that back onto Garbett, so they mirror more or less the lots, the existing lots on the east side of Garbett. The owner, the Lotco, is the developer of Mountain Croft. So what you see in Mountain Croft is, from a development point of view and a density and a housing form point of view, is going to be what will be in this subdivision. And the design guidelines and the architectural guidelines that we've prepared mirror that sort of approach. With the other point, and this will be my last point, is that with regards to the abutting Garbett residents, when we went through the pre-com process, it became obvious that we needed to communicate with the residents. There's a grade change there between the finished lot grades on Garbett and our site. And Al Allendorf actually had a meeting with the residents back in February of 2020. They hosted a meeting, I think it was at St. Mary's, I'm not sure, but there was a meeting there. That meeting was at that time, the proposal was presented along with some of the engineering options that regarding grading were presented and discussed with the residents. There was a follow-up letter from Alan's office to the Garbett residents in May of 2020, and another one recently in April of 2023. And the April 2023 letter was to update the abutting residents on where we were at in process, and that we although some of the residents were requiring a commitment from the developer to do certain things, we cannot provide that commitment until we know what the draft plan is that we're designing to, and then engage Tathams to complete the detailed design. In addition, whatever design we develop has to be again approved by and through the town's engineering department. So. We maintain that communication. We know that we have to address the concerns of the residents next door, and we know that we need to do that while respecting the town requirements for the engineering design of the subdivision. But overall, again, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to address you in the committee, but we're here to advise that we appreciate the Planner Wukash's report, the recommendations, and certainly support them. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I do recall that meeting at St. Mary's. Former Councillor Comey and I believe we were there and watched the consultation that went on. That was great. All right, so now we're at the public contribution comment portion. Is there anyone in the gallery who would like to come up and make comment? All right, we'll do one and then two, and then we'll go online.
Hello. Well, thank you, Madam Chairman and chair members, for allowing me to speak. First of all, I apologize about my wear. I was actually at work today at 11:30 when I found out about the timing of this meeting, and I actually thought it was at like 3:30, so I basically wrote this and ran here. So
We're actually jealous. So if you,
well,
but
this
you
is
could
what I
just-
work in. So
you
yeah.
can- If you could introduce yourself and your address, please, that'd be great.
My name's Thomas Russell. This is my 55th year of being a resident and calling Collingwood home. My parents were both high school teachers in Collingwood. This is basically all I know other than a little bit of time out at university. Some people might actually know me. I've been doing business since 91 in Collingwood when it was actually a pretty bleak area. My nickname's actually Little Ed, and I started Little Ed's Bike Shop, which just celebrated 31 years of existence in this town. Seen a lot of changes. I also am the owner of 73 and 75 Saunders Street, which are the last two lots on the east side of Saunders, directly abutting this development. I just want to make for council, just a correction, I guess not a correction, but a clarification. Mr. Wukash was saying how that development, the Finley Drive development was, done in the 70s, but it actually was built in the 2000s. So the zoning on it is, I guess, old school, if you want to call it something. It's R2. My lots, the smallest lot on Saunders Street that is abutting their proposed thing is my lot 73, which is actually only, I think, sorry, I'm skipping ahead here because I need glasses, but I can't see you guys with glasses. How did I do it? Anyways, yeah, it's 61 feet wide, and it was actually supposed to be bigger, but the county asked me to make it smaller to adjust for the corner lot of 75 to allow the county to use more visualization when they rebuild Saunders. So that's the smallest lot on Saunders, basically. My other lot is 80 feet wide, and most lots, including 63 Saunders, which is the third lot in, is actually 82 feet wide. So I'll get to that later, but I just wanted to point that out, that I am the owner of 73 and 75 Saunders. They are two homes that I built in the last 10 years on advice from Collingwood's development policy because we needed rentals in this town. 75 Saunders is actually my retirement home, hopefully someday. But as of right now, those are actually two homes with accessory apartments providing affordable, nice quality rentals in a beautiful part of town. So I actually have 4 families living in there. Very proud of those locations. I'm a very good landlord, and I take a lot of pride in Collingwood and particularly that area. My number one concern, considering this original proposal, was that, my concern being is that this original proposal, which is now 3 years old, obviously even a different council, it met a lot of resistance, not just on Garbett, but also on Saunders and the Finley development regarding these density variances and traffic issues. This amendment, I find, does not really address the original concerns, and as much as there's only, I think, me speaking, it was a very large resistance at the time, I think, because of this change. Yes, the developer has tweaked it, removing one lot to change the density, but I don't think that's really a good repair of this. And considering we only found out about this on Thursday, I didn't really have time to do a proper research of this. So my main concern is the density on Saunders, not necessarily with the development itself, but in the original proposal, the urban design report states in section 5, objective 8 is to respect abutting existing uses. Objective 1 mentions lot size matching on Garbett, which we've already have been spoken of, but the east side was only mentioned casually, but fails to mention anywhere the massive discrepancy between the lot sizes on either side of Saunders. The existing lots east of Saunders, which are my lots and my fellow neighbors' lots, and the proposed lots are 13.7 meters in frontage, whereas as I said before, our smallest lot on my street on our side of the street is 61 feet, where the average one is 80 feet. Much larger densities, I appreciate. The 7 proposed homes that are supposed to be on Saunders fits within the frontage of just 4 houses on our side of the street. So just for them to say that it's similar, it's not. It's quite a big difference. Yes, and it's discussed by, and I don't really understand this because I thought R2 zoned differently. And this proposal is on an R2 right now. That's where they're asking to switch to an R3, so a higher density. And they're talking about the minimum allowed in Collingwood is 15 lots per acre. On the existing lots, which are under 10 years old, on Saunders, I've done a quick math calculation and they're only 5 lots per acre. So there's a humongous discrepancy across this street, 3 times the density on the street. All these existing lots are less than 8 years old. Everyone on that street has built in the last 10 years. We all bought these lots in good faith with R2 zoning on both sides of the street because their proposal is still on an R2 planning, so we'd assume that we'd have similar lots on both sides of the street. Anyone who knows the Finley area, the lots are all large, and I guess you would call them estate properties. So to separate Saunders straight down the middle with this high density 15 lots per acre, and then on the other side 5 lots per acre, will really diminish the caliber, I guess, of the subdivision. A secondary part to that, as much as everything they proposed in their paper almost always talks about garbage, which actually is just backing onto them. So it's, they see each other's backyard, whereas in almost every entity of this property, the park, the road access and visual, almost all is on Saunders, where they have not really mentioned it at all, other than they keep saying it's similar. But as I mentioned earlier, it's not similar.
Mr. Russell, just let you know, you're at your 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I'll give you 30 seconds to wrap.
That's pretty unfair. But anyways, yeah, also having built for 5 years there, I watched the traffic patterns on Saunders, and this no way, even these reports, is it going to be legit that there's not a problem there and there's not been an answer to it. But I guess I just have to stop. But yeah, it's not proper. I mean, I get that there's density growth and we need it, but this side of the street is not it. This development, I get that we need that, but their component on Saunders does not match anything they're talking about over on the Mountain Croft side. There needs to be a better delineation, and they should rethink their density on Saunders.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Thank you. Thank you for that input, Mr. Russell. All right. So speaker number 2 at the back there, come on up.
Hello.
Hello.
Just raise us up a little bit here. So my name is Jordan Chezzy. Thank you very much, everyone, Your Worship, Mayor Fryer, Town Council, and town staff members for having me tonight. It's a very educational session, so I do appreciate that as well. So I'm a resident on the western side of Garbett Crescent. So I am one of those lots that backs on to Saunders. In reading the town report, I do appreciate the work that went into it, the thorough detail. One thing that I noticed on here that I wanted to kind of comment on tonight is that in the staff report P2023-20, it does reveal a merit score of 44%. So I'm aware that we are in a water crunch here in Collingwood. So before we do issue permits down the road for tree clearing, I'd like to just ask that everyone's mindful before clearing the lot that we're actually shovel ready to build. I know infrequently in Collingwood over the last couple decades, Mountain Croft was left barren for about 10 years before any building occurred. I look behind Georgian Meadows and it's left barren for a long time as well. So there may be reasons why, and if the utilities are one of the reasons, I'd like to ask that it's respected on behalf of the surrounding community of 50 Saunders that we're just watching that. That's pretty much it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, great. I'm just wondering if Senior Planner Wukash or Director Valentine would like to respond in terms of the timing where tree cutting and construction would start versus the SCAP allocation. Please, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of timing, I think the the developer would largely sort of be driving the schedule in terms of when they would like to apply to clear, but there are a number of requirements in the conditions of draft approval, excuse me, that require a number of studies and detailed engineering sort of work to be done before I think staff would consider that it would be appropriate to begin clearing. So that's that process, that construction process is different in many different cases. So I think we'd need to discuss that with the developer and get some further feedback on that. But there are a number of checks and balances in the conditions that we have at our disposal that give us control over when tree cutting and other construction occurs, because we certainly don't want to see sites be cut and sit vacant for long periods of time either. That's definitely not desirable from the staff standpoint.
Okay, thank you.
And my last comment, if I may.
Yeah.
Because we do have a school beside us, and there's a lot of property, and there's a lot of damage that can occur from dust and debris and a mess. So.
Okay. So noted. Right, thank you. All right. So now, if we go online, Deputy Clerk Dahl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have some remote participants. If you're wanting to speak to this item, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And I don't see that there's anyone wishing to speak at this time.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So I will now put the motion on the floor that we're considering is P 2023-20, the staff report P 2023-20, draft approval of a plan of subdivision and zoning bylaw amendment 50 Saunders Street dated June 19, 2023 be received, and that the draft plan of subdivision file number D1201120 50 Saunders dated September 4, 2019, revised March 3, 2021, and attached as Appendix A as redlined to provide for a 4.0 meter walkway width be approved subject to the recommended conditions contained in Appendix B to report P 2023-20, and that the zoning bylaw amendment attached as Appendix C to report P 2023-20 to facilitate the implementation of the 50 Saunders Street plan of subdivision be enacted and passed. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Perry, Councillor Ring, is that up? Yeah, okay. Questions, comments? Councillor Perry, see you're prepping there.
Yeah, I know it's been a long, thank you very much, by the way. I know it's been a long night and I don't want to go on about this, but the gentleman who just made the presentation, I think he made a great point about clearing lots. I know it's been going on quite a bit in town. And I think if we can do anything to prevent that, there's many empty lots now that are just sitting there and they've been sitting there for years. So until it's actually ready to be built, I would love to see that rectified in some way or another. Thank you.
Yes, Director Valentine, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to elaborate on Senior Planner Wukash's comments, there are a number of checks and balances in the conditions of draft approval regarding any type of site alteration or tree removal. And the largest is that before that happens, we do need to enter into a subdivision agreement with the town, which happens at the time of the service and capacity allocation batch review. So essentially, you will see the draft agreement come before you and would be satisfied that it contains and addresses the conditions prior to capacity being allocated and prior to site alteration or tree removal on the site. So we do believe that there are sufficient checks and balances, and certainly as Senior Planner indicated, it's not staff's desire or intent to see vacant treeless properties long before shovels go in the ground, and we've tried to bring those two pieces closer together.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Director Valentine. I appreciate that.
Okay. Councillor Ring.
Just a quick question through you to planning, I guess. There's going to be conditions put on this, obviously, before final approvals. One concern was, and I think you might have touched on it and I might have missed it, is the SCAP score. the difference in the SCAP score between the 44% that we evaluated and their evaluation of 64%. Would that be one of the conditions that they find ways to get that SCAP score up to at least the 50%?
Director Valentine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And certainly, oops, sorry about that.
No problem.
Must have double pressed that button. Certainly, we do provide both the staff score and the developer score transparently so that council can look at the rationale provided by both. And if there was a point of disagreement that council wish to discuss to change the score, that could be at this time. At the moment, the score would essentially be locked in at 44% unless they were amenable to changing their proposal, which conversations could continue. If the proposal does not change, they would go into the SCAP batched process with that score. So they would have to be understanding that there would be potentially other developments with much higher scores at that time competing for the same limited capacity. So of course it isn't within the developer's benefit to increase that score. But at this time, unless the development changes to any great degree, the score would be below the 50%.
Okay. And just a follow up to that question, if I might, Director Valentine, it seems to me we did have a conversation with the previous infill project wherein we talked about the inability of the infill projects to get the same amount of points. And we talked about maybe addressing that in future. Can you remind me about that conversation?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, for the reminder. SCAP was intended to apply to all developments across the entirety of the town of Collingwood and intended to be flexible enough to accompany large proposals, infill, etc. But we have noticed that the score is more difficult for smaller infill developments, which are quite important for intensification and development of our community, to attain the score. So we do take the opportunity within the staff report to explain any discrepancies and why the applicant wasn't able to meet the 50% threshold. And you have noticed that in this case, we are still recommending that council proceed. The developer did make many strides to try to elevate that score as much as possible. There's probably still a bit of wiggle room that we could work on in the interim. And the other really interesting part about this proposal is that comments from the public wanting that lower density type of development actually pushed the score kind of lower. So it was that balance between public commentary and responding and a SCAP score that the developer and staff were grappling with through this process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Potts.
Thanks, Chair Jeffrey. For the properties that are backing on from Garbett, it's been, I know the concerns been brought up in other developments, and I know there's a lot of, I guess, fill to come to grade. Do we have an idea of the elevation between the houses existing on Garbett and what the elevation would be for the houses that will be backing onto those properties? Just we've had concerns in other areas, and I thought maybe it would be the time to ask.
Senior Planner Wukash, is that one yours?
It is, yes, thank you. And if it suits council, I'll kind of give my perspective on it, and if it's appropriate, perhaps the developer could be asked to sort of fill in some of the blanks. But my understanding is that the desirable scenario would be to, as I mentioned in the presentation, to match the grades. So that would entail filling in the rear of the Garbett lots where there is a significant slope to be able to have sort of an equal setting between the two plans. If that situation can't be agreed to between the developer and the landowners, there are other alternatives that are probably less desirable from a engineering standpoint, because that slope would remain and there'd likely be another slope on the 50 Saunders property that would leave a bit of a depression in between the properties so that stormwater could be channeled and dealt with in an appropriate way without impacting anybody's property. So from staff standpoint, from what I gather, we would prefer to see a matching grade situation rather than a kind of a swale, so to speak. So that's my understanding of how the grading solutions have been planned to date.
Good.
Great, thanks.
Okay. All right. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. And forgive me if I haven't caught this on some of the materials. Is there eventually a proposal for Mary Street to have traffic control lights? Through you, Chair.
Senior planner.
Through you, Madam Chair, are you referring to like the Saunders Street at Poplar Side Road?
Sorry, I thought it looked like Stephen or the looping street would come at Mary Street, and I just wondered if that was the case, if there was going to be eventually traffic controls at that intersection.
Oh, I see. Thank you for the clarification. I was thinking you were meaning the main intersection. I am not sure. I'd have to consult with our engineering folks who I understand were here earlier in the meeting but had to sign off. So we can have that clarification for council in the amending report. And I think you're referring to whether there be like a stop signs or anything at that location on Saunders Street. Is that correct?
Yes. So it would be the intersection of Saunders and Mary and whatever the name of the looping street is. So we can find out about that. It's mentioned in the report that the county made some alteration requests, and I believe they were made. I wondered, will the looping street within the development, will it be able to be serviced by the county for waste recovery?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that will be a public street, so the county will provide waste services on that street.
Very good. And then just one last, if I could. On page 13 of the report, it made reference to 10% of the units having accessory dwellings for calculation purposes. And then later on in the report on page 23, under number 59, it proposes only a minimum of 5%. So I just wondered why that wasn't consistent as 10%. Find it okay there?
Senior
Through you,
planner
Madam
Mukesh,
Chair, yeah. That's a good question. I apologize if there's a discrepancy between those numbers in the report. We'll certainly clarify that for the amendment. I'm just going to the SCAP evaluation to see if I can determine what that number is. And I do see that it is a minimum of 5% of the development. So 3 units, I believe, was the number that the landowner was proposing.
Mr. Valentine?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, just to supplement Senior Planner Wukash's response. So the developer has committed to roughing in 5% of the units for a secondary dwelling unit. That doesn't stop others within the subdivision of undertaking that work in the future. And now that the provincial regulations under the Planning Act allow up to 2 accessory dwelling units, we did think that for the purposes of identifying if this plan was consistent with the growth plan, that we would look at likely a higher number than that initial 5% roughed in by the developer. So I think that explains the discrepancy between those 2 numbers.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Deputy Mayor, if you'd like, my understanding is that Manager Stuart West is back online. If you wanted to ask your question for engineering with respect to the traffic control, that may be able to answer it this evening if you ask it.
Yes, that would be great if we can get the answer, sure.
Yeah. Manager West, are you available there?
Good evening. My apologies. My audio, I hope, is working, but my video is not for some reason. Okay. Through the chair, yes. The question, I believe, was in regards to stop signs at Mary Street. The short answer that I can provide at this time right now is that we have asked that the developer provide some additional traffic calming studies to go along with their detailed engineering exercise. I can say right now that by the town's stop sign policy that's in place right now as well, Mary Street, unfortunately, would likely not be a candidate for a four-way stop sign, just based on the number of homes that live on Mary Street and use Mary Street on a daily basis, as compared to Saunders Street. There's essentially, to put it simply, there's a certain volume split that goes into assessing when four-way stop signs are required. And to put it simply, likely Saunders would remain as I guess a two-way stop sign at the intersection of Mary Street, if that makes sense. But what I can say is that in terms of traffic calming and especially with it being near a school zone, that it likely would be a candidate for, in addition to the temporary traffic calming that's installed every summer, we'd be looking at that as another priority street to consider alternative traffic calming measures other than stop signs as well. So, but if there's any follow up to that, I'm happy to try to speak to that.
So we appreciate that you were available. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Mayor Hamlin, did I see your hand up? So please.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have any additional questions. They've been covered. But I have been following this application for a number of years that it's been going on. And I am pleased to see the changes that the developer has brought to the development. These infill ones are always hard. And I do appreciate that the lots have been increased in certain areas to 45-foot frontages, which I know sounds small if you own 73 and 75 Saunders, so I'm sorry for that, but are actually pretty big considering what the province is mandating us to do. And I also have to take into account this is the lowest possible number of lots that would be allowed now under our official plan. I very much appreciate the work that's been done with the community on Garbett in terms of trying to come to an agreement on matching the grades and actually doing work or offering financial contributions to those owners so that the grades will be, matching and in good stead, because as Councillor Potts has mentioned, that's been a problem in a few of our new neighborhoods, and I can see it won't be one here. So I'll be looking forward to hearing the traffic calming measures that might be proposed. We have a lot of straight streets in that community that beg for speeding, so I'll be interested to see what, if anything, is proposed. But I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Okay. I think no other comments. All right. So with that, then I will call for the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. I think when you think about the impact of the City of Toronto, who just voted a citywide no more single dwelling units in an entire city, I think it tells you to the state of our need for housing. So, all right. So we're moving on then. Thank you very much. Thank you to our speakers who came to have input today. And you can watch for those conditions being met going forward in the next processes. So thank you. So that brings us back to our treasurer and staff report T 2023-13, the statement of reserves and reserve funds report year ending 2022.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think we have a presentation coming up. I'll try not to bore you to death with the last presentation tonight. As you mentioned, this is a short presentation on our annual requirement that we are mandated by council to prepare and present a statement of our reserves and our reserve fund balances, along with the adequacy of those funds. So if I can just get you to the next slide, please. I want to also note that when we talk about reserve funds, we are excluding development charges at this point because it has its own legislated report, and this is specific to our own reserves and reserve funds. And just to provide a little bit of clarity, I want to go back over what reserves and reserve funds are and just how they play a role in our financial statements. So what is a reserve? A reserve is an allocation of accumulated net revenue. So for all the private sector people, it's essentially our net income and how we're going to put it away for years to come. It's not associated with any specified asset. So a reserve is very general. We allocate whatever our surpluses are, or a deficit for that matter, to these funds, but they're not necessarily mandated that they have to stay in those funds. They're used more often than not as in conjunction with our operating fund, and they help support sort of surprise activities or supplemental activities, or just in general help support the tax rate from time to time. They don't earn interest, which is going to be a big differential or differentiating point between itself, reserves and reserve funds. But they do generate interest in the sense that any interest that does become earned on those funds is put towards the general fund. So when we go to calculate our tax rates, when you see investment income in our budgets each year, it's specifically on the interest that we've earned on our reserves. So a couple of good examples are our capital and operating contingency funds, our general reserve, and also the municipal election reserve. Next slide, please. So we talked about reserves. What a reserve fund is, I mean, they have a lot of similarities, but they have very important distinct features as well. Reserve funds are segregated and restricted to meet a specific purpose. So when we talk about the life cycle reserve fund or the water reserve fund or the wastewater reserve fund, they're very much for a specific purpose. They represent money that we've set aside by bylaw. So through bylaws, we have established these reserve funds, or by upper level government legislation, like the federal gas tax, or I should call it the Community Building Fund now, or the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund. Any kind of grants that are mandated by the province where we can accumulate over years are specific for that, and they're obligatory. The interest that is earned on reserve funds is accumulated into the fund itself. So when we earn interest in the life cycle reserve fund or in the water reserve fund, whatever we earn gets applied to the projects that are paid for throughout those for those funds. There's a further segregation for reserve funds specifically, and there's obligatory, which basically the name tells you what it is. We're obligated to spend that money based on legislation or a bylaw. And then, let me rephrase that, based on legislation only. So development charges are an obligatory reserve fund. The federal gas tax, I keep doing that, the Canada Building Fund is an obligatory reserve fund. Discretionary, though, is through a council bylaw. So it's not mandated or legislated from the upper levels of government. It's what council does to ensure we're setting aside the amount of funds that we require to do the things that we need to do. But one of those things is that council has control over what those discretionary funds are. So in a sort of catastrophic situation, if there were funds that we felt needed to be moved from one fund to another because there was some sort of, I can't think of a catastrophe right now, but I don't know, a huge tornado, and we needed funding and there wasn't enough in the working funds, for example, you are, as council, in charge of what those reserve funds are used for and how they are used, and also what the balances are in those funds to a certain degree. Obviously, it goes through budget and all that. Next slide, please. This chart, it's also in the report. It just breaks down sort of the hierarchical view of what reserves and reserve funds do. Reserves are sort of general, easy to manage in the sense that there isn't any legislation. It's more about flexibility. We talked about sustainability and flexibility. Reserves provide that flexibility. Reserve funds provide sustainability, because those are the things that we're saving for the future to help us. And then they're further split, as we talked about, between obligatory and discretionary. Next slide, please. What this report focuses on is the definitions, and then of course what the balances are of the total reserves and reserve funds in the report for figure 1 and figure 2. You can see the breakdown of each type of reserve or reserve fund. Historically, entities such as the province or lending institutions use this information to monitor how municipalities are doing. So again, I'm going to say they're never going to just use this one indicator. It's helpful in a collection of indicators to show them where the municipality is at and how healthy it actually is. Lots of things come into play, the age of assets and anticipated future expenditures, the overall financial statements, all of those things are taken into consideration. But again, it's nice to know that when we look at this number, that in fact we are quite good and healthy based on what the provincial says is an average or a median. The number that it shows here is 117%. So that was the reserves and reserve funds as a percentage of our own source revenue. And I think what the risk range is that it's greater than 20%, you're in the low category. So we're well beyond that, which is really good news. I think what also is really important to talk about is that reserves and reserve funds get built up over time. So on an annual basis, the ultimate goal is that we're every year putting away a certain amount of funds to help us build towards the future. Because as we know, expenses don't come in straight line and we can only spend $2 million a year and that makes life really simple. It doesn't work that way. We know, and a great example is with the water reserve or the water treatment plant, we're building a balance to help us pay for the water treatment plant and the other things that need to be taken care of as well. But it takes years to build these funds. The goal is to build the funds on an annual basis at the same amount or somewhere close to the same amount. So there's minimal effect to rates, both user fees and tax rates. So I'm going to ask you to go to the next slide. This graph is going to show you sort of the normal build up to a reserve or a reserve fund. And it also shows the expenditures. So the blue columns are the balances of the reserve funds. And this is just a mock, it's just a pretend one. The green line shows you our contributions on an annual basis. And the red line that you can see doing this shows the expenses or what we spend in that reserve fund. So you can see as we follow along, I have a straight line amount of $2 million going into this particular reserve fund every year. Again, we're trying to smooth out expenditures, smooth out what will happen to our tax rate and our user rate. We look at these things out, in some cases, 50 or more years to understand what exactly it is that we need over that amount of time. We also look at interest. We look at CPI. We look at how much the expenditures are going to go up and down. But the ultimate goal is to maintain sort of a steady flow. So steady eddy gets us to what we need to be, and then we don't impact or unduly impact our users or our taxpayers. But then you can see the expenditures. The expenditures are all over the map because, of course, things break. Sometimes we plan for when rehabilitation is required, and you can't get the parts, or things happen a little bit earlier or sometimes a little bit later. But we always see expenditures go up and down. So when we talk about reserve funds being at this massive amount, this 117% in comparison to the average at around 50 or 60%, we're building up. That's where we're at. We're in a stage. We're behind when it comes to some of the rehabilitation projects, which we note in the asset management plan that there's a backlog. But we're building ourselves up to accomplish those really big projects that are coming up in the future. So when we talk about not looking at things and saying, well, this is great. It is great. It's fantastic because we've positioned ourselves, or council has positioned us to a point where we are very comfortable and healthy. But it doesn't mean that we don't have to continue to do so or to plan for the future. Next slide, please. So the next section of the report talks about the adequacy of our reserves and our reserve funds. We do have policies for each of our reserves, or let me rephrase that, for our reserve funds and our reserves. And each one sets a target balance with respect to it. Some have sort of minimum thresholds and maximum thresholds, and we'll talk a little bit about those. But there was an overall reserve and reserve fund policy that was put in place back in 2015 or 2016. And it's an important part of financial management. It's an important part of what we do every day. And the current policy states that we will strive to maintain between 5 and 15% of own source revenues for funds that promote financial stability and flexibility. So going back to own source revenues, essentially it's our taxes, it's the user fees we get out of planning fees and any kind of user charges that we charge, and water and wastewater and things like that. And we have said that our reserves for stability and flexibility will be between 5 to 15%. When we look at this category of reserves, our total balance is at $9 million. And that puts us at 14.8%. So we're well within range of the policy, in fact, at the high end of the range. The funds that we would include in this calculation would be the general reserve, the working capital funds, and also our capital and operating contingencies as well. Next slide, please. The adequacy of our reserve funds, we also look at the Government Finance Officers Association to see that, to make sure that our 5 to 15% still makes sense and is still contextual to today's world. And the GFOA has always said or maintained that we should be able to sort of carry on operations for 2 months without receiving revenues, which would mean we should be at a rate of about 16.7%. When I use their calculation, and it's specific more to contingency reserve and reserve funds that protect the general tax base, the town is at 17.9%. So we're just above it, which is great. And again, talks about our sustainability. Next slide, please. So this is a huge chart, but I'll kind of highlight the key features. So I think during our first draft, when we brought the year-end report forward to council back in March or April, and we talked about how we were going to allocate the net surplus for the year, we spoke about the reserve fund policies specifically that are included in the surplus management policy. Some of those are, they're all included here, but what I've noted on the side, so you'll see these are balances, what the target balance is, and whether they're over or under the target balance, and then I've put some notes that are included in the report. I won't go through it all because it is all there, but I'll highlight that overall, the town is about $1.7 million technically overfunded in accordance to what the policies we have stated. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some funds are overfunded, so to speak, and some funds are underfunded. Most significantly, and you guys hear me say all about asset management so much, but our life cycle management is underfunded at $4.1 million. But when we look at our land acquisition fund, with respect to our target balance, we're actually overfunded by about $2.5 million. Now, if we look at these target balances today, do they all make sense necessarily? Probably not. I think we need to look at these policies again and update them because, of course, land prices have gone up significantly. There's lots of land that we will need to continue to expand and do the things that are included in the 10-year plan. But certainly, we're measuring ourselves against the current policies, and they're all great starts and all make a lot of sense. And for the time that they were passed, they certainly were very helpful, and I think they continue to be helpful today. There's two things that we're requesting as part of this review in this staff report, and the first one is that we currently have a reserve fund called 10% non-DC. So back in the day, the Development Charges Act would not allow municipalities to fully DC recover for certain aspects of our services. So the library was included in that, and Parks and Recreation was included in that as well. So when a project, let's say for the parks, was $1 million, automatically 10% would be reduced off of that, meaning only $900,000 was incorporated when they developed our development charge fees. That's gone by the wayside and is no longer part of the Development Charges Act, and has actually been in place since the beginning of 2021. So we have been funding our projects accordingly, but there's a small balance sitting in that fund that we would like to move to the life cycle reserve. It helps with the underfunding that reserve is, and in fact, essentially, it has a similar, it wasn't really intended for growth portions of DC or what was considered to be growth. So we thought if we move that over to the life cycle reserve, it would still meet the objective in terms of assets, and it's about $320,000. The second part of the resolution speaks to the municipal elections reserve. What we found is that elections, just like everything, have gotten more and more expensive. Including the electronic voting, but still maintaining the manual ballots, means essentially we're paying for multiple election mediums, I guess is the word. So what we've seen over the last 2 elections, probably more so in the last election, that the price has gone up significantly. At one time, it was thought that an election would cost about $100,000, and we're more in the range of about $130,000, $140,000 now. So that's the second part of the resolution, is requesting that we increase our annual allocation to election reserve funds, which we did in 2023 as part of the budget, to $35,000 from $20,000. So I think that wraps up my presentation. Happy to answer any questions or clarify any information.
Okay, thank you, Treasurer Quinlan. So we have no one in the gallery who would wish to speak to this exciting topic. Is there anyone online?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We do have a couple of remote participants still in attendance. If you'd like to speak to the staff report, if you could please raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen.
Okay, thank you. All right, so our motion is that staff report T2313, Statement of Reserves and Reserve Funds, year ending 2022, be received for information, and that staff be directed to transfer the balance of the 10% non-DC Growth Reserve Fund to the Life Cycle Reserve, as the 10% requirements are no longer in place under the Development Charges Act, and dissolve this reserve fund. And further, that the election reserve's target balance be increased to $140,000 to adequately reflect current election costs. If I could have a mover and a seconder, please. Mayor Hamlin, Councillor Perry, and questions or comments? Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Hamlin. It is exciting because it's such a good report from the standpoint of the position the reserves are in. So thank you for the informative presentation in that regard. Back when we had the preliminary year-end report, there was the discussion about the surplus variance policy. And through the questions the other day, Treasurer Quinlan was good enough to send us all the policy FIN 0004-001. The intention back then was that there would be further discussion because I thought that we should be considering taking a look at the policy and possibly making some amendments. And Treasurer Quinlan has also spoke about the target balances maybe should be revisited. So what stands out to me in the policy is the first bullet, which is ensure that surpluses are returned to taxpayers. And surpluses don't disappear. They've been going into reserve generally is the practice of the past years. I'm gonna work on as part of the process in dealing with the treasurer. I wanted to work on a little bit of an amendment to bring forward in regards to the surplus policy for consideration by council. And what I'm specifically thinking is along the lines that when we have a municipal tax increase in a particular year, if we have a surplus for that year, I do believe that a portion of that surplus should first be allocated to whatever the overall tax increase was meant to generate. That would mean, depending on the timing of the budgets, within the year or two, we'd be returning whatever the tax increase generated, some of that or all of it, back to the taxpayers who generally would have been paying it. So I'm just giving an overall view on my thought of an amendment that could happen with the policy. And in the end, for 2023's budget, we kind of did that. We took a portion of the forecasted surplus and we applied it to the directly to the affordable housing requirement that we were going to have, thereby reducing the need on tax increase. So I'm definitely supportive of the report. As I said, I think it's a very good news story again about positioning, and I do believe that that we need to thank our taxpayers. Our taxpayers are the reason why we're in the financially excellent health position that we're in, and we're working towards getting our strategic financial plan together, where we can start to show them the long-term planning in regards to how the funds are going to be utilized. So. As I said, I'm definitely in support of the receiving the report and the motions that are on the table.
Okay, thank you. All right, so just to clarify, with respect to paragraph 2, the amount represented by the 10% non-DC growth is $319,479. That's correct?
That's correct.
Yep. All right, and then the increase to the target balance would basically be impactful to our budget, and we're making that motion ahead of time as opposed to at budget time. Is that correct?
Madam Chair, through you. So correct in the sense that we did include it in the 2023 budget. This would essentially just update the policy, and on the go forward, we would follow the what we did for 2023 as well.
Thank you. Mary Ellen. Yeah, that's fine. Okay.
I just have a question arising out of the Deputy Mayor's comments about the surplus. Right now, through you, Madam Chair, to the Treasurer, the surplus in accordance with the current policy, it goes into the reserves. Is that where it's going?
Madam Chair, through you to Her Worship. Yes, so there is a sort of planned action in the sense that it goes to a specific reserve and then slowly builds its way down. But yes, it all goes into reserve or reserve funds. Once those reserves have met target balances, it follows itself through. But the very first one is looking at the contingency funds, which we've talked about are at their maximum or target balance, and then they work their way through the rest of the funds. That's
so. Just as a follow-up, does this partly explain why we're in such great financial shape with our reserve funds because of that surplus policy, would you think?
If I may, Madam Chair, I do think it certainly helps that situation. Again, we wouldn't want to take one indication and say that makes us very healthy, but overall, when we look at across all of our indicators, including the financial statements, we would say, yes, Town of Collingwood is a healthy organization. Having this policy in place, I wish I would have written it. It's a very good policy. Marjorie, our previous treasurer, wrote it, and it's quite in depth and very well done, including the policies for each individual reserve as well. It has certainly attributed to the overall reserve balances that we have today, for sure.
Thank you.
CEO Skinner.
Thank you very much through you, and also to the mayor and potentially to the deputy mayor as well. While we are in very good financial health, and we may wish to look at some of our policies, we do have a deficit or a gap in how much we're putting forward for the asset management plan. There will be an update to all of council later this year relating to the non-core assets. So we might want to look at our overall, financial intentions with that also in mind. And I'm sure that's what the treasurer would do in the discussions with those of you who are interested.
Okay.
Actually, I'm sure you're all interested.
We are really interested. Okay. All right. So I'm seeing no further discussion. All those in favor of the motion? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Okay, we're almost there, folks. Departmental update, item number 7. Do we have Manager Cole and or Operations and Transit Coordinator Chris Wisniak with us? That's how we feel, Chris.
We're pretty good. Good evening. Thanks for having me tonight, Madam Chair, members of council. I'm going to just do a quick little department update on the status of our on-demand implementation. We've successfully completed 2 full weekends of the on-demand service. We have currently 127 riders registered through the on-demand system. We're about 80% via the app and web-based, and 20% who have called in via telephone, and our operator has taken their information via that way. Over the last 2 weekends, we've served and fulfilled 91 total trips with an average user rating of 4.5 out of 5, which is pretty good, I would say. Although the numbers don't seem large, I don't want to be discouraged. I have been around since we started the Wasaga Beach link and the Blue Mountain link. In the first months of operation, we were seeing between 8 and 12 to 15 riders a day on those buses. And it took some, 3 to 4 months before people started realizing the convenience of those transit routes. And I would like to see the similar sort of results in the on-demand transit. During those 4 days of operation, so it's 2 Saturdays and Sundays we've run, we've operated 12.5 hours in total on the road to fulfill 91 passengers, where a typical route over 4 days would be about 56 hours on the road. So looking at that, that's about almost a quarter of vehicle drive time on the road. Similarly, with kilometers, over those 4 days, we've done 52 kilometers on the road, where a typical bus in a typical day does about 308. So the amount of vehicle drive time is significantly lower that we're seeing in these early stages. Surely that will increase as we see the rider demand start to come online a little bit more. Over the past 2 weekends, the on-demand has completed about 14% of the total ridership on the transit system. With keeping in mind, we are still operating the normal system in parallel to the current on-demand. I wasn't available when Director Salama had done the update to council on June 5th. At that time, we were just shy of a week of implementing the system. And from the amount of calls I was receiving and some of the comments we were seeing on Facebook, I certainly felt it necessary to listen to our audience, to be able to continue to provide normal transit while we allow our rider base to get educated and use the on-demand at their own pace. It may seem counterproductive, but I want to ensure for the people that I listen to day to day, I want to ensure that nobody's missing a day of work. Nobody's going to be late to their job. People can still get to appointments when needed. So with that said, we're going to continue to evaluate this over the next 2 to 3 weeks and see where our ridership changes. And if we start seeing more of an uptake, we can look at more of a positive lean towards the fully on demand on the weekends without the parallel fixed route operating in tandem. With the second phase of the on demand, we were planning on utilizing the software for the specialized transit plus. Our drivers, the feedback that we've received from our drivers has illustrated that it would be a far more efficient service by using the on-demand system booking and the routing to be able to handle the volume of calls we were receiving on Transit Plus. So currently the Simcoe County Links specialized service also uses Blaze, which is our provider. And they're using it for their specialized, and they have been having fantastic results in achieving efficient and on-time rides for their accessible passengers. The third phase of the on-demand was to look at implementing it on weekday evenings, so probably between 5 to 9 p.m. That's about when our ridership drops off. I still feel more comfortable at this point continuing over the next few weeks. We've got a really, actually a fairly excellent analytics module that our operator provides for us that I can view exactly what's happening. So we're going to keep a pretty keen eye on how the ridership is progressing, and then provide the necessary timelines and communication to our rider base when we're able to implement it fully. So overall, in my opinion, I think it's been successful. We had no major technical issues over the past few weekends. I had the opportunity to be at the farmers market for several weekends leading up to the launch and speak to riders in the community and to meet riders coming on and off the bus. So you know, there's mixed feedback, and I think that's fairly normal with anything that's really new. But I'm hoping in the next few weeks, we're going to start to see things improve, and I can provide another update to council in form of a departmental update, maybe with a little bit more visual stats to be able to present to you.
Great information. Thank you very much for the update. Are there any questions for? No? Okay, seeing none. So that's great. And I think with transit, the word of mouth by all those people who gave you the 4.5 out of 5 will do you a lot of good as well. Oh, Councillor Ring, yeah.
Thank you very much, Chair Jeffries. From point A to point B, how much time are we saving with the on-demand, or are we saving time as to the traditional? Because I think that's going to be the biggest sell, is people not having to stand there and wait for, or when they do get on a bus, taking an hour to get around town. Has there been much of a difference?
Through Madam Chair to Councillor Ring. So looking at our dashboard, I was looking at it this evening just here. The average drive time for stops in town was 10.2 minutes, which is fantastic. But we have to look at it on the trip as a whole. So we're looking at the time to wait at a stop, the time to either get to your full destination. We're trying to look at full start to finish. In terms of the actual ride on the bus, it's almost a 50% reduction in time. I've had 2 individuals contact me who had used it, and I had actually spoken with them prior to the launch just to give them some more information, and they found it extremely convenient. My son had a lacrosse tournament on that the first Saturday it was on, and I hopped home for lunch, and then I came back on the on-demand transit, and it was there when I booked it, and it dropped me off right downtown. So it works. And I think once we start to have the community really experience it, they're going to realize it's a really convenient option.
Excellent. All right. So there's no other questions. Thank you very much, to both you and Manager Cole for staying around to help us out here tonight.
No problem.
And enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So now we're on to item 8, reports and minutes of other committees and boards. And I will read it in. There are no recommendations contained. It's just strictly minutes this evening. That the minutes of the following committees and boards be hereby received and recommendations contained therein be approved. The Collingwood Downtown BIA Board of Management, May 11, 2023. The Collingwood Heritage Committee, April 17, 2023. And the Trails and Active Transportation Advisory Committee, May 11, 2023. I have a mover and a seconder for those. Councillor Potts, Councillor Houston. Any questions or comments with respect to the minutes? Yep, Deputy Mayor.
If I may, I just got to find my spot again. With the trails, there was a note there about a solution for Sunset Point crossing to the Chipper, and there may not be anybody who can give an update on what that possibly was, or I just would like to know if there was a solution reached, what it was, and that's something that could be provided to us.
Provided at a later date. CEO Skinner, we're okay with following up with that?
Yes, through you, we can certainly follow up for that. That's really largely a crossing to make sure that children and families can get across from the parking area into our very popular and beautiful new Sunset Point playground.
The other one was in regards to heritage. It mentioned about doors open Simcoe County, and some concerns had been put over to the county side, and I was just going to ask, is that all okay, or does anything need to be followed up on with county staff in that regard?
Who will that go through to?
That can come.
Yeah, okay. So that'll come later. All right.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. All right. So there's no other questions, and I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Next, consent agenda. That the general consent agenda be herein received, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. 9.1 is an email with respect to the 6th Street cycling safety, and there was no request ahead of time to pull the item. I'll have a mover to receive. Councillor Houston, you putting that up, and Councillor Potts. Any other questions? And just really to comment that with respect to the 6th Street cycling safety, we still have an ongoing public consultation, and that will find its way to that process for sure, or already has. All right, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Is there, at your peril, any other business?
Take a chance. Okay. It is just a quick question. I was looking through the plan things for coming to committee in the future, and if I recall correctly, we were going to be getting another report from Parks and Rec in regards to the deciding about the stage 3 of the arts center. So I wondered, because I didn't see it on the list, I wondered if there was a timing idea of timing for that to come.
Okay, thank you. Just ask the CEO to respond.
Thank you. Through the chair. This one is imminently coming forward in the next number of weeks. We were still doing some work on that. We haven't reviewed it at the final staff stage yet, but it'll be before your summer break for sure, and hopefully not too close to that.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. No other business? If you have it, it's okay. All right. Public delegations. We have no one in the gallery. Is there anyone online, Deputy Clerk Dahl? I was going to say Deputy Mayor Dahl.
It's been a long day. Thank you, Madam Chair. We do still have some people participating remotely. If you'd like to address the Committee of the Whole this evening, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And there's no one wishing to speak.
All right. So that will take us to notice of motion. And we do have Mayor Hamlin on here.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. The actual words of the motion are going to be on the next agenda, and it will also include, based on some discussions I've had with staff, that the motion also include seeking a legal opinion relating to the town's powers in respect of the private roads.
Thank you. All right. So there is nothing else. I'm looking for someone to move adjournment. I'm looking Deputy Mayor. Well done. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Sorry.
Is that vote ever?
No, I can honestly say no.